Daenerys Targaryen stood on the deck of the great ship as it cut through the choppy waters off the coast of Westeros. Dragonstone's dark silhouette rose before her, its ancient towers perched upon a crag of black volcanic rock. Waves lapped hungrily at the fortress's base, and the wind howled through the narrow, twisting passages. It was here, on this island fortress, that the Targaryen dynasty had first set foot on the continent many centuries ago. And it was here that Daenerys hoped to begin a peaceful reclamation of the realm that had once belonged to her forebears. She had come with 3 dragons, with unsullied soldiers, and with loyal advisors who believed in her cause. Yet she had arrived with no intention to cast the realm into a storm of blood. The memories of war were far too fresh in Westeros. The War of the 5 Kings had left entire fields blackened and sown with corpses. The small folk had suffered under the ambition of lords, and houses had fractured beyond repair. If anything, Daenerys Targaryen wanted to be a balm upon those wounds. She had crossed the sea not simply to conquer, but to heal and restore. She listened to the shrill cry of gulls overhead, felt the salty spray on her cheeks, and exhaled. Ser Davos Seaworth guided her small party to the old causeway that led to Dragonstone's main gate. He was a Northman by allegiance now, but she had summoned him for his knowledge of this fortress, and because she trusted him to speak plainly. Tyrion Lannister walked at her side, his eyes flicking from side to side, already analyzing the fortress for signs of weakness or potential. He had grown up near the sea in a castle nearly as grand, but never in his wildest dreams had he imagined he might one day help place a Targaryen on the Iron Throne. Each step Daenerys took on the rocky ground seemed to carry the weight of hundreds of years of history. She could feel her ancestors in the wind, hear them in the crash of waves below. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the taste of desert wind and the sting of the sun on her face when she'd been exiled across the narrow sea. Now she had returned. Her hair was pale silver, her face set with determination. If she was to rule this land, she must do so in a manner that would not repeat her father's madness, nor ignite the realm in fresh warfare. Varys followed behind, silent and watchful as ever. His footsteps seemed almost ghostly in their quietness. He, too, believed that a peaceful approach might succeed where swords and flames had only created further ruin. But it would not be easy. Daenerys was aware that many in Westeros feared Targaryens, even loathed them, for the specter of the Mad King loomed large in memory. Her father's atrocities remained a grim tapestry in every corner of the 7 kingdoms. She planned to sever that dark thread of history. She would not set herself up as a tyrant, no matter how many legions and dragons stood at her beck and call. Her dragons screeched as they soared above Dragonstone's ramparts. Drogon, the largest and fiercest, circled the highest tower. Rhaegal and Viserion followed, their reptilian cries echoing across the shore. It would have been simple to subjugate the castle with fire, but there was no need. She had already been welcomed by the few guards and attendants who remained. Dragonstone stood nearly deserted, a relic of Stannis Baratheon's failed efforts and of House Targaryen's ancient glory. Daenerys strode into the great hall of Dragonstone, the clang of her boots on the basalt floor echoing in the chamber. The high, vaulted ceiling was carved to resemble the jawbones of a dragon, and the walls were etched with ancient sigils of her house. She took her place at the great table carved to resemble the map of Westeros. Tyrion joined her on one side, Varys on the other. Ser Davos, Missandei, and Grey Worm were close behind. Tyrion cleared his throat. "A good first step," he said softly, his eyes roaming the chamber. "Dragonstone is yours by right, your grace. Now we must decide how to present your claim in a manner that does not spur the lords into immediate rebellion." "Let us call upon them," Daenerys replied. "Let us summon the lords of each region if they are willing to come. Let us show them that I bring no threat but an olive branch." Ser Davos nodded. "Some lords might be more open than others. The Reach may be in turmoil, but House Tyrell's memory still carries weight. The Vale is loyal to young Lord Robin, though Lord Baelish wields influence there. The North is under the guidance of Jon Snow. The Riverlands are scattered thanks to the destruction of House Tully. And King's Landing, well, Cersei Lannister sits the Iron Throne. She won't gladly yield it. But perhaps there are other ways." Daenerys looked at Tyrion, her eyes softening at the mention of his sister. You know Cersei better than any of us, she said quietly. I do not want to unleash the dragons upon King's Landing. It would only prove the realm's worst fears about me, but I will not allow her to keep that throne. There must be a way to do this peacefully, even if it requires cautious steps. Tyrion exhaled, folding his hands upon the edge of the stone table. Cersei is a proud woman consumed by the idea that power is both her birthright and her only shield against a cruel world. Appealing to her humanity or her sense of reason might not be enough. But if we can sway the small folk, convince them that your rule would be gentle, Cersei may find her position untenable. She's holding King's Landing by force and intimidation. If the people turn against her, she'll have nowhere to hide. Daenerys studied the massive carved table with all its carved mountains and rivers. Her finger traced a path along the neck, down past the trident to the crownlands where King's Landing lay. She could almost see the spires and domes of the city in her mind, the masses of people living in poverty and fear under the weight of Lannister rule. We will begin with hearts and minds, then, she said. And we will start by meeting with those most likely to listen. I refuse to burn the city my ancestors built. Varys gave a slight bow of his bald head. The lords of Dorne may be receptive, your grace. They once supported your claim through Prince Oberyn Martell's ambitions. The Martells themselves are no more, but the Dornish remain resentful of the Iron Throne after so much blood has been spilled. If we approach them with the promise of peace and respect, they might be persuaded to lend their voice to your cause. It's decided then, Daenerys said. We shall send word to Dorne, to the north, to the Vale, and to the Reach. Anyone who might hear us, anyone who might come to the table. Let them know that I wish to speak, not wage war. Missandei stepped forward with a parchment and began drafting letters under Daenerys's dictation. The tone was careful, balanced. An invitation, not a command. While Missandei wrote, Daenerys's mind whirled with the possibilities. She had never attempted to negotiate the takeover of a kingdom before. All her victories in Essos had come either by cunning or by dragons and steel. But she had learned that conquering did not always mean ruling well. She had learned that fear could buy obedience but seldom loyalty. And loyalty was what she needed if she was to protect this realm from further bloodshed. The messages were dispatched by Raven at first light. Daenerys stood on a balcony high in Dragonstone's towers, the sea wind whipping her hair about her face as she watched the ravens disappear into the horizon. Each bird carried a small but potent hope for unity. If her calls for peace were met with silence or scorn, she knew her path would become much darker. Over the next fortnight, she moved through the fortress, reacquainting herself with the ancient halls that had once been the seat of her ancestors. She wandered alone at times, listening to the crash of waves, reflecting on the ghosts in these stones. Her dragons roost in the courtyard, content to circle the skies and dive into the sea in search of fish. Grey Worm and the Unsullied patrolled the walls to ensure that no spies or saboteurs found a way in. Tyrion dedicated hours with Varys to writing more letters, forging alliances through thoughtful words rather than intimidation. At last, they received their first answer, a raven from Dorne. Lady Olenna Tyrell had taken refuge there after the fall of Highgarden, and she had apparently brokered a meeting with the new lords of Dorne, lesser houses that had risen in the Martell's wake. They had agreed to meet with Daenerys on neutral ground in the coastal town of Sunspear to hear her proposals. Daenerys insisted on traveling with minimal escort. She wanted to show her good faith. She took a single ship to Dorne with Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, and a few Dothraki guards. Varys declined to accompany her, choosing instead to remain at Dragonstone and await further replies from the other great lords. The journey south was surprisingly calm, the seas as placid as Daenerys' own determination. She spent her days on deck, lost in thought, mindful of the delicate game she was about to play. When they arrived at the harbor near Sunspear, the air was hot and dry. The sky stretched in an endless arc of azure, and the sun glinted off the pale sands that surrounded the fortress. Dornish soldiers in light armor stood on the docks. Their leader, a tall woman with sun-kissed skin and a spear at her back, introduced herself as the representative of the new council that governed in Dorne. With her stood Lady Olenna Tyrell, clad in her widow's weeds, her keen eyes flicking over Daenerys as if appraising a precious gem. "Welcome to Dorne, your grace," said the tall woman. "We've heard much about the Breaker of Chains, the Mother of Dragons. We hope your arrival heralds a better day for our people." Daenerys dipped her head graciously. "I thank you for agreeing to meet with me. It is my wish that we find a way to bring peace and prosperity back to all the 7 kingdoms, including Dorne. My father's reign cast a dark shadow over this land, and I seek to remedy those wounds, not deepen them." The woman's expression was guarded. "We shall see." But she bowed and offered Daenerys a seat at a shaded table set up along the harbor, where platters of fresh fruit and pitchers of cool water awaited. Daenerys and her companions settled, and Lady Olenna eased herself onto a cushioned chair, leaning forward. She was old, yes, but sharp. "My dear girl," she said in a voice that carried both fondness and steel, "I believed you were our best hope for avenging the crimes committed against my family, but you've asked for peace now. Does that mean you are no longer prepared to punish Cersei Lannister?" Daenerys met Olenna's gaze, unflinching. "I have no love for Cersei. The realm will suffer as long as she sits the Iron Throne. But I do not believe punishing her requires me to unleash fire and death upon thousands of innocents in King's Landing. I want a resolution that spares as many lives as possible. Cersei will face justice, but I refuse to be the one who turns the city into ash." Lady Olenna's lips pursed thoughtfully, and the Dornish woman beside her inclined her head. "And what do you ask of us?" the woman said. "You called us to the table. If you want peace, then we presume you also want our support in pressing your claim." "Yes," Daenerys replied. "I need allies who will accept that my rule will be different than the Targaryens of old. I don't demand oaths of subjugation. I offer an alliance. Dorne will keep its customs and traditions. In return, I ask for your recognition of my claim to the throne, peaceably if possible. If it comes to a confrontation with Cersei, I wish to ensure that innocent lives are protected. With Dorne and House Tyrell's backing, I can weaken her hold in the south. Perhaps that will bring other lords to the table more willingly." Olenna steepled her fingers. "The Lannisters have no love left in the Reach. My people starve under Cersei's mismanagement of the crown's finances, and the fields that once bloomed have been neglected or destroyed. They would gladly turn to a Targaryen queen who promises restoration and mercy. But you must understand that my house has always been proud. They won't simply bend the knee without assurances. And House Martell, added the Dornish woman, is gone. But Dorne remains. We will not bow to any ruler who threatens to treat us as less than equals in the realm. If your father's shadow lurks in your heart," Daenerys raised a hand gently, "I hold no such darkness. I assure you, the mistakes of my father will not be repeated. I swear it." She paused, then continued quietly, "If you join me, I will respect Dorne's right to rule itself in matters of local governance. You shall have your seat on my council when I am queen, should you desire it. In return, I ask you to open your ports to trade with Dragonstone, to lend your voice against Cersei when the time comes, and to show Westeros that we stand together." There was a silence broken only by the cry of seabirds and the soft rush of the waves. Olenna leaned back, pressing her lips tight as she considered. Then she let out a slow breath. "I suppose no queen worth her salt ever ascended without a risk. I pledged my support to your cause once, albeit with different circumstances in mind. I will pledge again, but I warn you, Daenerys Targaryen, do not let your father's sins haunt you. You have a chance to be better. Take it." "Thank you, my lady," Daenerys said, her chest tightening with relief. To have the Tyrell matriarch's endorsement meant access to her remaining bannermen and the name that still carried considerable influence in the Reach. The Dornish representative nodded once. "You shall have our alliance as well, on the terms you've described. Dorne is weary of war. If we can help you claim the throne without burning King's Landing to the ground, we will. But remember this, we have long memories. Promise us no betrayal or tyranny." "I promise," Daenerys said. "The days of tyranny must end if we wish to rebuild." Over a light meal, they discussed details: how many troops could be spared for a garrison, how trade routes might be reopened, how word would be spread to encourage more lords to attend a peaceful summit. Daenerys insisted that she was not raising an army to march on King's Landing, but rather forming a united front. She wished to force Cersei's hand to the negotiating table, not storm the gates. Olenna was skeptical of Cersei's willingness to negotiate, but conceded that a show of unity in the south might embolden other regions to accept Daenerys without a fight. Before the sun dipped below the horizon, Daenerys and her retinue departed, having sealed new bonds with handshakes and solemn vows. As the ship sailed northward along the coast, Daenerys felt the first stirrings of genuine hope. She had not spilled a single drop of blood. Already alliances were forming. Perhaps, if the gods were kind, she might actually succeed in claiming the throne without plunging the 7 kingdoms into a fresh nightmare. Upon her return to Dragonstone, more ravens awaited. One was from Jon Snow in Winterfell. He wrote of pressing concerns, rumors of an undead threat beyond the wall. He had heard that Daenerys had dragons, and he believed dragons might be key to confronting the White Walkers. He requested a meeting. Daenerys stood on the parapets, letter in hand, as evening shadows lengthened. Tyrion joined her, scanning the horizon. "What do you think?" he asked. "The king in the north invites us to parley. This would be an unusual alliance. Historically, the north has little love for the Iron Throne." She read Jon Snow's words again, noticing the earnestness in the short sentences. There was no flattery, no flowery language, just a grim account of dangers beyond the wall and a plea for help. If he's telling the truth about these White Walkers, and I have no reason to doubt it, then we cannot ignore a threat to the entire realm. If there is an army of the dead, then none of our politics will matter if it sweeps south unchecked. But I need him as well. The North's acceptance of my claim would mean I don't have to march armies there, which could only cause more resentment. Perhaps we can form an alliance of necessity. An alliance formed in adversity can be a strong one, Tyrion said softly. But it will be difficult to convince the rest of the realm that the dead walk unless we have proof. Maybe it's wise to invite Jon Snow here to discuss matters face to face. Daenerys nodded. Send him a raven at once. Tell him I will meet him in Dragonstone. We shall talk of the dead and the living. If I can secure peace with the North, it will serve as a powerful example to the other regions. Within a fortnight, Jon Snow arrived with Ser Davos. Their small ship docked under the watchful eyes of the Unsullied, and they ascended the winding path to Dragonstone's gates. Daenerys greeted them in the great hall, seated upon a simple wooden seat rather than any throne. She wished to look as though she were not lording over them. She was dressed in muted colors, a conscious choice to soften her aura of authority. Jon Snow entered, a tall, brooding figure with dark hair, accompanied by the older, grizzled Davos. She could see caution in Jon's eyes, as though he approached not just a foreign queen but a coiled dragon that could strike at any moment. Daenerys stood to greet him. "Welcome to Dragonstone, Jon Snow. I hope the crossing was not too difficult." Jon inclined his head. "Thank you for receiving me, Your Grace. The sea was manageable. I'm grateful for the chance to speak with you." She gestured for him to join her at the table. "I understand you have urgent matters beyond the wall. My father, the Mad King, did not leave the best impression on the North. I would like us to forge a new path, for I believe we need each other." Jon looked at her dragons through one of the high windows, where Drogon lounged on a spire. "You might be right," he said quietly. "What we face in the far north is no ordinary foe. I did not believe it myself until I saw it with my own eyes. The dead are marching, led by these White Walkers. If they break through the wall, every kingdom will be in peril. The living will have to unite or face extinction." Daenerys listened intently. Tyrion watched them both, occasionally offering a comment. Ser Davos explained the hardships the North had endured in the recent wars, how winter loomed heavily, and how few resources they had to mount a significant defense against an undead army. "Our dragons can be a formidable weapon," Daenerys said thoughtfully. "But I cannot simply fly north and begin a war if the realm isn't secured. We are attempting to establish peace and unify the 7 kingdoms without further bloodshed. The people of Westeros won't easily trust a Targaryen who arrives and wages a war beyond the wall. They will question our motives, our sense of reality." Jon understood that all too well. He was painfully aware of how few believed his warnings. "If there is a way to show them proof, to convince them that the threat is real, would you be willing to help us?" She inclined her head. "Yes, on one condition. That the North does not rise in rebellion against my claim to the throne. I do not demand blind loyalty, but an alliance. Together we can save the living. And afterward, if I have proven myself worthy, I ask that you acknowledge my rightful place as Queen of the 7 Kingdoms." There was a pause. Jon Snow exchanged a glance with Davos, and the older man gave a slight nod. Jon turned back to Daenerys. "The North is wary of southern queens, especially after all we've suffered. But I sense honesty in your words. If you truly mean to protect the realm, then you will find no quarrel with us." Daenerys extended a hand. Jon took it, a spark of surprise in his eyes at the sudden intimacy of the gesture. "Then let us be allies, King in the North," she said softly, "and let us show the realm that we are stronger together than apart." In the days that followed, they discussed strategies to gather undeniable proof of the undead threat. Tyrion suggested capturing one of the Whites as evidence, a risky plan that would require a daring mission beyond the Wall. Daenerys did not like the risk, especially not for Jon Snow himself, but he insisted that the realm would never unite unless they saw the horror of the living dead for themselves. While those plans slowly took shape, ravens continued to arrive from other corners of Westeros. The Vale was hesitant, citing the youth of Lord Robin Arryn and the influence of Peter Baelish. The Riverlands were fractured, but pockets of Tully loyalists expressed hope. Cersei remained silent, or at least no official word came from King's Landing. Yet rumors circulated of her vengeful, paranoid rule, how she used the remnants of the Lannister and Gold Cloak's forces to stamp out any hint of dissent. Daenerys pondered a different angle. If the city of King's Landing itself began to lose faith in Cersei, that might force the Queen to negotiate or even abdicate. Tyrion suggested they send discreet envoys into the city, distributing food and messages that painted Daenerys as a benevolent ruler. It was dangerous work, but Varys' network of spies and informants proved invaluable. Slowly, word spread in the slums of Flea Bottom that there was a Targaryen queen who offered bread instead of whips, mercy instead of terror. The small folk began whispering of Daenerys Stormborn, breaker of chains. Old men recalled the fairness of King Jaehaerys Targaryen's laws, a distant memory of Targaryen kings who had not all been mad. The Gold Cloaks found graffiti scrawled in alleyways, "Queen Daenerys will feed us," or "Fire and blood no more." The seeds of doubt in Cersei's reign were sown, watered by the hardships the people endured each passing day. Meanwhile, the northern mission took shape. Jon Snow insisted on leading it. Daenerys argued against his personal involvement, fearing for his life. But he remained steadfast. "My people will only believe it if I see it with my own eyes and if I can bring proof. I will not send others to risk what I will not risk myself." Daenerys could not help but admire his resolve. In a moment of quiet, she confessed her fears to him. "I do not wish for you to die, Jon Snow. You have become important to these negotiations, important to me." Her voice softened with the admission she did not fully understand herself. Jon brushed a lock of dark hair from his eyes. "I have a duty to the North and to all living men. I would ask you to keep your dragons ready. If we run into trouble, we may need your help." So it was agreed. Jon sailed north with a small band that included some of Daenerys' trusted warriors, along with men of the North. They planned to venture beyond Eastwatch by the sea, find a White, and return with it for all to see. It was a terrifying gambit, but Tyrion insisted it was the only way to persuade doubters like Cersei. With Jon gone, Daenerys turned her attention back to the delicate tapestry of alliances. Word arrived that House Arryn might send a representative to Dragonstone, if only to glean more about Daenerys' intentions. House Glover and House Mormont in the north had extended cautious support to Jon, though they remained suspicious of Targaryens. The storm of politics intensified, yet the hallmark of Daenerys' approach was a careful patience. She refused to strike out in anger, refused to let the dragons serve as more than a symbol of her power. She did, however, fly her dragons far above the seas around Dragonstone, letting fishing vessels catch glimpses of the beasts in the sky. Soon, tales spread up and down the coast of the 3 living dragons, all grown fearsome and proud. To some, it was a sight of wonder and hope, to others a dread reminder that the Targaryen queen held a power unmatched in living memory. But crucially, the dragons did not burn ships or farmland. They soared overhead, watchful, majestic, but kept in check by Daenerys' hand. Tyrion often wandered the halls at night, restless with strategy. One late evening, Daenerys found him in the war room studying the carved map table. "We have to find a way to draw Cersei out," he said, hands braced on the stone. "She won't come to us willingly, but she might come for a parley if it's framed as a way to prove the threat beyond the wall. If we manage to bring that White south, she'll be forced to see reason or risk looking like a fool. But that alone won't make her surrender the throne." "Perhaps not," Daenerys conceded, "but it might weaken her hold. If enough lords desert her, she'll have no choice but to stand down. The more voices join our cause, the more inevitable my ascension becomes. She must realize she cannot stand alone, no matter how many gold cloaks she commands." Tyrion grimaced. Cersei was never one to bow to inevitability. She'd sooner blow up the city if she couldn't rule it. Daenerys's jaw tightened. Then we must act before her desperation turns to cruelty. I will not see King's Landing destroyed, not by Dragonfire or wildfire. We must rely on the realm's common sense. The small folk do not want another war. They want bread, they want safety, they want a future. If we can show them that future without bloodshed, we will win. In time, ravens arrived with news from the north. Jon Snow's group had succeeded in capturing a white, but at great cost. Some had died, others narrowly escaped. Daenerys's dragons, led by the queen herself after she learned they were trapped, had flown to their rescue in a daring flight beyond the wall. Though the rescue mission was fraught with danger, Daenerys was relieved to find Jon alive, albeit battered and nearly lost to the cold. She had lost one of her dragons in the battle, Viserion, struck down by the Night King's spear. The pain of that loss weighed heavily on Daenerys's heart. She felt as though a piece of her soul had been ripped away. Yet, amidst that grief, she had found a strange closeness with Jon, who understood what it meant to sacrifice so much for the greater good. Their shared sorrow bound them more tightly than any treaty could. They returned south with the captured white, determined to prove the reality of the threat. A raven was sent to Cersei in King's Landing, requesting a parley in the Dragonpit, a neutral ground within the city's walls but separate from the Red Keep. To Daenerys' slight surprise, Cersei accepted, likely curious to see this living dead for herself. When the day of the parley arrived, Daenerys traveled by ship to Blackwater Bay with a modest escort. She left most of her unsullied in Dragonstone to avoid provoking a standoff. Tyrion warned her that Cersei would see any large force as a threat and might use it as a pretext for violence. The Dothraki remained on the outskirts, only a handful joining to guard the queen's person. Jon Snow arrived with his northern companions. The tension was thick in the streets of King's Landing. Gold cloaks lined the route, grim-faced, uncertain whether to fear Daenerys or obey Cersei. As Daenerys entered the Dragonpit, she saw Cersei seated upon a raised chair, Jaime Lannister at her side, the Queen's Guard arrayed around them. The Hound, Sandor Clegane, was there, glowering from under his helmet. Euron Greyjoy stood to one side, arms folded, a sneer etched on his lips. Daenerys approached calmly, her posture regal but not hostile. Jon, Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm accompanied her. Cersei's gaze was a dagger, but she forced a thin smile. So, the Dragon Queen finally enters the city. Her voice was ice. Daenerys did not flinch. I come with proof of the threat that looms over us all. If we do not unite, there will be no Iron Throne left to fight over. Jon gave a nod to one of the northern men who hauled forward a chained crate. It rattled ominously. The tension spiked in the pit as all eyes fixed on the wooden box. Jon gestured and the crate was opened. The white burst forth, snarling with dead eyes, clawing at the air. Jaime paled, stepping back in horror. Even Cersei's mask faltered for a split second. Euron cursed under his breath. The demonstration was visceral. The white's inhuman shriek echoed off the dragon pit's walls. Jon showed how fire could wound it and how dragonglass could kill it. The creature collapsed in a twitching heap after the demonstration. Silence hung in the stale air as Cersei stared, face ashen. Where did you find this abomination? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. North of the wall, Jon said. And there are thousands more like it. We barely escaped with our lives. The Night King leads them, and each day their army grows. Living men alone cannot stop them. Cersei took a breath, struggling to regain her composure. She glanced at Jaime, who stood tense and uncertain at her side. Her eyes flicked to Tyrion, then back to Daenerys. What is it you want from me, Daenerys Targaryen? She demanded softly. Am I to kneel before you while ghouls tear apart my city? Daenerys shook her head. I do not come here to force you to kneel. I come to ask for a truce, a cessation of hostility. While the armies of the living unite against the army of the dead, I ask that you do not attack my forces, nor the North, nor Dorne, nor the Reach. Let us stand together against the true threat. Jon added, once the threat is dealt with, we can return to sort out who should sit the Iron Throne. But if we fail to defeat the Night King, there will be no throne to sit upon. Cersei let out a bitter laugh, though there was fear behind it. What makes you think I would allow you to build your power unchallenged while I wait patiently for the dead to be destroyed? Perhaps I should simply let the dead come. You will weaken yourselves fighting them. Then I can clean up what remains. Tyrion took a step forward. You know you can't hold the throne alone if the realm turns against you. The people already whisper of a queen who might spare their lives while you force them into further war. Do you truly think you can stand alone against an undead horde if it marches south? Jaime placed a hand on Cersei's arm. He looked into her eyes. pleading. "We've seen it, Cersei. This is no trick. Don't let your hatred blind you to the end of the world." A hush fell as Cersei wrestled with her decision. Daenerys watched the flicker of emotions across the Lannister queen's face. Fear, anger, contempt, desperation. Finally, Cersei exhaled. "Very well," she said. "I will agree to a temporary truce. My forces will not engage yours while you deal with these creatures. In return, you will not move against King's Landing or attempt to subvert my claim." Jon bristled. "I've already pledged my support to Queen Daenerys." Daenerys laid a calming hand on his shoulder. "We shall not march on King's Landing, nor will we seek to undermine your rule until the threat is gone. Afterward, we must negotiate the rightful occupant of the Iron Throne. If you choose to cede it peacefully for the good of the realm, we can avoid another war. If not—" She trailed off, letting the unspoken possibility hang in the air. Cersei rose abruptly, the tension in her voice more revealing than she likely intended. "Let us first survive this war against the dead. Then we shall see who stands victorious." With a swirl of her gown, she departed, her retinue following. Euron Greyjoy scowled, but he too took his leave, muttering curses under his breath. In the aftermath of that fraught meeting, Daenerys and her allies stepped out into the late afternoon sun outside the Dragonpit, the warm rays a comforting contrast to the chill that had pervaded the negotiations. She breathed a sigh. Tyrion ventured, "She won't hold to the truce. She'll find a way to break it. That's how Cersei operates." Jon grimaced. "Then what good is this?" Daenerys looked between them. "Even if she breaks her word, we have her on record as agreeing to a truce. The realm will see that we tried to unite. If she betrays us, she betrays the living, and the living will not forgive that." Over the weeks that followed, Daenerys dedicated her resources and manpower to the preparations for the war against the Night King. The North, the Vale, some of whose knights had come to Jon's aid, Dorne, and the remnants of the Tyrell forces pledged men. They would gather in Winterfell. Daenerys herself flew north on Drogon, the largest of her remaining dragons, to oversee the final arrangements. Rhaegal followed closely, still mourning the loss of his brother Viserion in silent roars. In Winterfell's courtyard, Daenerys felt the chill of the true northern winds. The castle bustled with a mixture of Northerners, Dornish, Reachmen, and even Dothraki, the latter shivering in furs. The tension between these disparate peoples was palpable, decades, even centuries, of mistrust and old wounds. Yet they had come together under Daenerys's call for unity and Jon Snow's leadership of the North. She walked the ramparts with Jon, sometimes late at night. The northern sky stretched wide overhead, punctured by cold stars. Daenerys confided in him her worries. What if she lost another dragon? What if the army of the dead proved too vast, too strong? Would her cause and all Westeros perish in a swirl of snow and ice? Jon squeezed her hand, offering what solace he could. He too carried that weight of fear. But together they carried hope. Scouts returned with grim news. The army of the dead had breached the wall at Eastwatch thanks to the Night King's new weapon, a white dragon, the resurrected Viserion. The living braced themselves. They had no illusions about an easy victory. But Daenerys's remaining dragons, the combined armies and caches of Dragonglass and Valyrian steel gave them a fighting chance. At last, the undead horde drew near. The wind howled across the tundra, bringing a sky heavy with cloud. The first ranks of wights appeared at the edges of the forest, shambling horrors with vacant eyes. The living held firm behind Winterfell's walls, archers at the battlements, swordsmen at the gates, dragons circling overhead. Daenerys stood astride Drogon, clad in thick leathers and furs, her face set like stone. The battle that followed would be remembered in song for generations, though the living who survived would never care to relive its terror. Waves of the dead crashed against the barriers. Daenerys commanded Drogon to spew fire upon the masses below. She was forced to face the twisted reflection of her own child, Viserion, now an undead monster, shrieking ice-blue flame. Rhaegal wrestled Viserion in the skies, brother against undead brother, while Daenerys guided Drogon into the fray, unleashing blasts of Dragonfire on the White Walkers who commanded the Whites. Jon and his men fought bravely in the courtyard, defending the main gate with dragonglass spears and swords. Dothraki screamers, dwarfed by the snowfall, charged the flanks, while northern cavalry struck from the rear. There were moments when all seemed lost, when the endless ranks of dead threatened to overwhelm the living. And then came flashes of hope. A White Walker shattered by a Valyrian steel blade, a white giant toppled by a flaming catapult. Finally, in a moment of chaotic struggle, Jon came face to face with the Night King amidst the swirling snow. The confrontation was brutal and swift. The Night King wielded his spear of ice, while Jon parried with long claw. Daenerys saw them from above and urged Drogon to dive, blasting the ice with flames. But the Night King, unervingly agile, hurled his spear at Drogon, forcing Daenerys to steer sharply away. Even so, the flames gave Jon the opening he needed. He lunged forward and buried his sword in the Night King's breast. For a moment, the blue eyes of the undead leader blazed. Then he shattered like fragile glass. The undead army lurched, spasmed, and began to collapse. Viserion, locked in aerial combat with Rhaegal, howled as bright cracks of light spiderwebbed across his undead hide. He crumbled, plummeting to the ground in pieces of icy residue, leaving Rhaegal shrieking in pain and confusion. On the battlefield, thousands of whites dropped where they stood. The great tide of death dissolved into wind-blown dust. A stunned hush descended. The living had won, but the cost was immense. Bodies lay in heaps, human and direwolf, Dothraki and Northmen alike. Fires crackled amidst the snow, which was now stained red. Smoke hung over Winterfell's battlements. The last echoes of the undead roars faded into a bleak hush. Daenerys dismounted in the courtyard, stumbling through the carnage. She found Jon leaning wearily against a broken wall, Longclaw still in his hand. Blood trickled from a deep gash on his brow. He looked up at her, relief shining in his eyes, as if unable to believe they were both alive. She crouched beside him, taking his hand. Neither spoke, for there were no words to encompass the enormity of what they had survived. Days followed where the survivors tended to the wounded, burned the dead, and tried to salvage what was left of Winterfell. Daenerys ordered her healers to treat northern soldiers first, insisting that the people of this castle be spared no comfort that she could provide. She made a point of walking among them, offering condolences, gratitude, and promises to help rebuild. The northern folk watched her with wary eyes at first, but that wariness turned to a quiet respect. She had fought for them, bled for them, lost a dragon for them. As news spread that the Night King was defeated, ravens flew to every corner of the realm. The dawn of a new age loomed. There were no more White Walkers, no more rotting armies of whites. Now, the living could refocus on the question of the Iron Throne. Daenerys gathered the northern lords in Winterfell's Great Hall, along with representatives from Dorne, the Reach, the Vale, and even some from the Iron Islands who had abandoned Euron Greyjoy. Jon Snow stood at her side. The hall fell silent as she addressed them. The threat we feared is gone, thanks to the bravery of all here. But a question remains, who shall lead us now? I have made my claim to the Iron Throne. I have Targaryen blood, the birthright of my ancestors. But I will not take the crown with fire and blood. I leave it to the lords and ladies of Westeros to decide. A ripple of surprise swept through the gathering. Lady Mormont, a fierce young girl with a stern expression, stood from her seat. We in the North know what it is to choose our own leaders. But we also remember those who stand with us in our darkest hour. You have proven yourself a friend to the North, Your Grace. We will not forget that. Sansa Stark, who had stood near the back of the hall, spoke next. We have lost much. My father, my mother, my brothers. But we have a chance to rebuild a realm in peace. I do not want another war. Jon Snow may be king in the North, but we know that to stand alone is to risk more ruin. If we can unite behind a queen who proves merciful and strong, then perhaps the tragedies of our past need not shape our future. Tyrion, observing from one side, could not suppress a small smile. The tides had changed dramatically since Daenerys first arrived on Westerosi shores. Now the lords debated not with are to fight her, but whether to accept her as queen. A representative from the Vale spoke of the queen's clemency and her willingness to protect even those who had once opposed her. A new master from House Glover recounted Daenerys's personal bravery in the war against the dead. The murmurs grew. At last, the question was put to a vote of acclamation in the old style. One by one, the lords of the North raised their voices, aye. The lords from Dorne joined, aye. The Knights of the Reach, led by what remained of House Tyrell's allies, offered their approval. The Vale's men nodded. And so it went until a chorus of voices echoed through the hall, chanting her name. Daenerys, stunned by the wave of support, placed a trembling hand over her heart. She looked at Jon, who gazed at her with quiet pride. It was not the forced loyalty her father had demanded, nor the violent submission Aegon the Conqueror had once enforced. It was a choice freely given. and its weight nearly brought her to her knees. Amidst this triumphant moment, a group of riders burst into Winterfell's courtyard, escorted by the Unsullied. News traveled that Cersei Lannister had been deposed in King's Landing. The Gold Cloaks, weary of her tyranny, had turned on her after receiving word of Daenerys' victory against the Night King. A city in desperate need of stability had rebelled. Cersei had tried to hold the Red Keep with her remaining loyalists but found herself isolated. Jaime Lannister, some said, had tried to reason with her and was forced to flee when she threatened him with wildfire. With no other recourse, Cersei was rumored to be in hiding or captured. Reports varied. The city awaited Daenerys' arrival not as a conqueror but as a liberator. Tyrion sighed with relief, though sorrow touched his face at the thought of his sister's fate. Still, it was a resolution that spared countless lives. Daenerys conferred with Jon, Tyrion, and the Lords of the Realm. They would make for King's Landing at once to secure the capital and ensure peace was maintained. The journey south was an odd one, for they did not march as an invading force. Instead, they traveled in a ceremonial procession joined by Northern Cavalry, Dorne's Light Horse, and the Vale's Knights. Dothraki rode at the flanks, forming an honor guard. Grey Worm led the Unsullied with perfect discipline. Daenerys flew ahead on Drogon, scanning the road for trouble. Rhaegal flew alongside, still mourning but loyal. The small folk in towns and villages turned out to cheer or stare in wonder. A hush of astonishment followed whenever the dragons passed overhead. Fear, yes, but also a sense that something new, something wondrous had come to Westeros. When they neared the gates of King's Landing, Daenerys saw the crowds thronging, kept in check by gold cloaks who no longer wore Lannister colors. These guards parted to allow the Targaryen queen's procession through. The city had endured war, famine, and tyranny. Its people looked haggard, hungry, yet there was hope in their eyes. Daenerys glimpsed signs scrawled on walls, "Welcome, Dragon Queen, and she who saved the living shall save us too." The sincerity of these messages struck her heart. The Red Keep loomed high above, and Daenerys recalled the last time a Targaryen had sat there. Her father had come unhinged, seeking to burn the city rather than lose it. She would do the opposite, save it rather than conquer it. In the throne room, the remnants of the Queen's Guard knelt in submission, offering their swords. She accepted them with a nod, refusing to let vengeance guide her hand. Jaime Lannister was not present. No one knew his whereabouts. Cersei had vanished, leaving only rumors behind. Some said she had been spirited away to Essos. Others claimed she had taken her own life rather than bow. Tyrion heard these rumors with a stoic face, a faint sadness in his eyes. No one disputed Daenerys' entry. The realm had chosen her, the city had risen against Cersei, and the armies were assembled at her command. There would be no bloodshed in taking the Iron Throne this day. At last, Daenerys walked the length of the throne room, her steps echoing in the cavernous space. Jon Snow stood off to one side, wearing the cloak of the north, though his gaze followed her as she advanced. Tyrion was there with Varys, who had discreetly returned to the city. Grey Worm and Missandei flanked her, while the lords and ladies of Westeros gathered as witnesses. She halted at the foot of the Iron Throne, forged from 1,000 swords in the fires of the Targaryens' past conquests. For a moment, she stared at it, remembering all the blood that had been spilled for that chair of twisted metal. Then she turned to the assembled. "This throne was made in conquest. It has been kept through fear. But I come to you now, after a great war against a terror that threatened all life, to ask for peace. Will you have me as your queen? Not to force you, but to serve you, to see all the peoples of Westeros safe, fed, and free from fear." A hush settled like a tangible presence. Then, one by one, the lords and ladies knelt. The gold cloaks knelt. The small folk gathered in the throne room bowed their heads. Even the old maesters who stood in the shadows lowered themselves. Daenerys could not breathe for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight. Jon Snow smiled softly, and he too bent the knee, though his eyes never left hers. "My queen," he murmured, voice carrying the warmth of a promise. With solemn steps, Daenerys ascended the dais and turned. A hush fell again as Tyrion approached, holding a simple golden circlet. It bore the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. He placed it upon her brow, and she closed her eyes, feeling the cool metal rest against her silver hair. The weight was immense, yet it was borne by love rather than fear. All in the hall rose. Daenerys Targaryen, first of her name, Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Protector of the Realm, looked upon her subjects, not as a tyrant nor a conqueror. She had not taken the throne in fire and blood, but through unity, sacrifice, and the will of a war-weary people. And so she vowed, "I swear to rule with justice. I swear to bring prosperity, to protect the weak, to open the halls of power so that no one voice may rule unchecked." I have my dragons, yes, but it is your voices I will heed. The horrors of the past must never be repeated." They cheered then, a thunderous cry that reverberated off the walls. Daenerys felt tears prick her eyes. She thought of Drogo, of Yora, of Viserion, of all she had lost and all she had gained. This was not the conquest she had once imagined. It was something kinder, something that might endure. In the weeks that followed her coronation, Daenerys worked tirelessly to heal the capital. Grain was distributed among the hungry. Plans were drawn for the restoration of war-torn fields in the Reach. The gold cloaks were restructured into a city watch loyal to the people rather than a single queen, though they served the crown to maintain order. Tyrion served as hand of the queen, employing his wit and sense of justice to navigate the labyrinth of Westerosi politics. Varys resumed his post as Master of Whisperers, though Daenerys cautioned him to use his little birds sparingly and ethically. The small council welcomed representatives from Dorne, the North, and the Vale, ensuring a broad swath of perspectives. Jon Snow eventually returned north, entrusted with ensuring the Northern Lord's loyalty and overseeing the rebuilding there. He and Daenerys parted with an unspoken promise. Perhaps one day, their paths would lead them to share more than just alliances. The realm still had countless wounds: orphans from the war, villages burned, bandits roaming the roads. But each day, Daenerys enacted new measures to restore what had been lost, refusing to raise her dragons in cruelty. Only once did she publicly display Drogon's might within the city, to melt down half a dozen captured Lannister swords, forging them into plowshares to be distributed among farmers in the Crownlands. The spectacle served as both a symbolic act of transformation and a reminder of her power. But no city gates were burned, no lords roasted alive. She recognized that the memory of the Mad King's atrocities loomed large, and she took careful measures never to mirror them. When word spread across the narrow sea that Westeros was stable once more, merchants and traders began to return. The ports of King's Landing and Dragonstone thrived with new goods. The once insurmountable debt of the crown was gradually repaid through fair taxation and open trade, a system Tyrion and the Iron Bank of Bravos negotiated painstakingly. The Tyrell lands began their slow restoration, aided by seeds and knowledge from Dorne. The Riverlands, scarred by years of strife, looked to the Queen for guidance in distributing farmland among peasants who had lost everything. Throughout it all, Daenerys personally saw to it that the small folk were not ignored. She visited orphanages, listened to petitions, and occasionally walked the markets under discreet guard to see the conditions for herself. She had freed slaves in Essos by the thousands, and while there was no formal slavery in Westeros, she knew indentured servitude and crushing poverty could be nearly as oppressive. She worked with the High Septon to establish charitable houses. For the first time in years, people began to speak of the crown with hope rather than dread. There were challenges still. Some of the old Lannister bannermen skulked in the shadows, bitter about their house's fall from prominence. Euron Greyjoy remained at large, a menace on the seas, refusing to bow. Daenerys sent the royal fleet, bolstered by alliances with Yara Greyjoy, to hunt him down. Skirmishes erupted along the coasts, but it was not a full-blown war. Daenerys sought to resolve these threats methodically, using diplomacy where possible and decisive action where not. Yet no single conflict lit a spark that threatened to engulf the continent. The memory of the dead army's invasion was too fresh, the fear of another war too potent. Most found it better to accommodate Daenerys Targaryen than to challenge her authority. In time, an uneasy peace settled over the Seven Kingdoms. The free folk beyond the wall were left in peace, having fought alongside the living against the dead. The North rebuilt under Jon Snow's supervision, forging a new sense of respect for the crown. The Riverlands, the Vale, and the Crownlands each had seats on Daenerys' council, lending their voices to shape the Queen's decisions. One evening, Daenerys strolled through the Red Keep's gardens, a rare moment of quiet. The last rays of sun turned the sky gold and pink. She paused at a spot overlooking Blackwater Bay, leaning on a balustrade as the wind played with the loose strands of her hair. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Tyrion. He bowed slightly. "Your Grace, a message from the Iron Bank." They seemed quite pleased with the new arrangement. No mention of raising interest rates or sending assassins this time. He smiled wryly. Daenerys let out a soft laugh. That's welcome news. I hope we'll soon pay off the last of the debts and free the crown from financial shackles. Tyrion nodded. He lingered a moment, looking out at the bay. The reflection of the sky danced upon the waters. Finally, he said, "You've done what few thought possible. You took the throne not by terror, but by unity. You defeated the dead, you won over the north, and you prevented King's Landing from another sack. Even Cersei's downfall was bloodless. In the end, I must congratulate you. It's what I always hoped for, but never truly believed I'd see." Daenerys glanced at him. "We've come a long way, but the real work is just beginning. A wise ruler does not grow complacent. The realm must heal. We must keep working, keep improving. I've seen how fragile power is and how easily a ruler can slip into tyranny. I won't let that happen." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the garden. Tyrion bowed again. "Then I will continue to serve you, my queen, until I can no longer lift a quill or speak a word." "Thank you, Tyrion," she said softly, touching his arm. She left him in the garden, lost in thought, and made her way toward her private chambers. There she found a letter waiting from Jon in Winterfell. He wrote of a new system for distributing land to the small folk, a policy Daenerys had encouraged. He spoke of a successful harvest and an upcoming festival in the north to celebrate surviving the long night. At the end of the letter, he inquired after her health, calling her Dany in a personal, almost tender way. She smiled as she read his words, feeling a warmth in her chest. Later that night, she stood on her balcony, gazing at the city lights below. Drogon roost on a nearby parapet, watchful eyes shining in the moonlight. Regal soared somewhere high above, a silent sentinel over King's Landing. The capital was quieter than usual, the hum of daily life subdued by the hush of night. She thought of the time she had flown above Meereen, the city once racked by slavery and chaos. She had changed it for the better, though it had not been easy or bloodless. Here, in Westeros, the change had come in a different manner. She saw the reflection of stars on the roofs, heard the distant murmur of river water, and felt something close to peace settle over her. She knew that not every soul in the Seven Kingdoms adored her, that pockets of dissent or resentment would linger. She knew the scars of war and the threat of future conflicts would never vanish entirely. But the great alliances formed in adversity, the unity forged by the victory against the Night King, these bonds were strong. She had proven that a Targaryen need not rule through terror. She had proven that the dragons could be harnessed for protection rather than destruction. She had given the realm a chance to breathe, to rebuild, to look forward instead of backward. As she let the gentle breeze brush across her face, Daenerys Targaryen closed her eyes and silently thanked those who had come before her, who had dreamed of a better Westeros. She thought of her ancestors who had been just rulers, of the people in Essos she had freed, of the Northmen who had learned to trust her despite her name. She thought of Jon Snow, whose unwavering sense of duty matched her own. And she thought of all the innocents who might now live without fear of tyranny or undead armies. This was what it meant to be a queen, she realized, a shepherd to the people, an arbiter of fairness, a guardian of peace. No amount of tradition or birthright could replace the responsibility she now held in her heart. She was their queen, chosen freely, entrusted with the well-being of every soul in the realm. It was a tremendous weight, but it was also the greatest honor she could ever bear. Dawn came, softly gilding the rooftops and the spires of the city. Daenerys rose from her rest, adorned in a gown that combined Targaryen black and silver with a subtle northern wolf's fur trim, a quiet acknowledgement of the alliance with the north. She stepped into the throne room where a line of petitioners already waited. A small child with wide eyes and patched clothing approached, bearing a simple request for grain to feed her starving mother. Daenerys knelt to listen, summoned a clerk to arrange the needed supplies, and whispered gentle words of encouragement. The child left, hope glowing on her face. So began another day in the reign of Daenerys Targaryen. No fanfare, no forced submission, no roars of war. Just a hall filled with people seeking help, seeking justice, seeking a future. Standing beneath the great arches, Daenerys watched the child go, and she felt a surge of determination. She had dreamed of the Iron Throne for so long, had journeyed across scorching deserts and treacherous seas. Now that she sat upon it, she saw the truth. The throne was just a seat of cold metal, a symbol. Real power lay in compassion, in forging bonds with people who sought a better life, in uniting a fractured land through dialogue rather than fire. She did not know what the years to come would hold. Rivalries would simmer, ambitions would flare. But if she could nurture this fragile peace, if she could teach the realm that a queen need not be cruel, then perhaps the future of the Seven Kingdoms would shine brighter than all the twisted swords of the Iron Throne. She would guide them, protect them, and show them that the words fire and blood could mean rebirth and unity, not slaughter and vengeance. In that hush of early morning light, as the next petitioner approached, Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, lifted her gaze, resolved to rule with empathy and strength. Far away, Drogon let out a cry that echoed across the city, not in menace but in a sound that felt almost triumphant. The city below stirred to life, and in the hearts of its people bloomed the notion that at last they might see a better day. It was not a dream fulfilled by bloodshed. It was a reign built on hope, on alliances freely offered, on the promise that even a Targaryen could break the wheel of history without shattering the realm beneath it. The darkest nights had passed. Dawn had come, and so, with unwavering resolve, Daenerys Targaryen claimed the throne, peacefully, for the good of all. Daenerys Targaryen rose early each morning to hear the pleas of her new subjects in the Red Keep's throne room. The grand pillars still bore the scars of the recent turmoil, scorch marks from wildfire, fractures in the stone from the chaos that had accompanied Cersei's final days. Yet people now entered these halls less afraid than before, drawn by stories of a different sort of ruler, a queen who listened. On this particular morning, as pale sunlight streamed through high, dusty windows, Daenerys felt an unaccustomed lightness in her chest. She wore no crown, only the simple band set with 3 small, dragon-shaped ornaments. She'd chosen it because it was far less intimidating than the spiked, heavier crown once favored by her ancestors. Upon the Iron Throne, she sat with quiet composure. Her silver hair, pulled back into a loose braid, shimmered in the filtered sun. Grey Worm and 2 Unsullied guarded the base of the dais, ever vigilant, yet the rest of the hall contained no menacing lines of steel. She did not wish to see her petitioners cowed by displays of force. The day's first supplicant was a trembling old man clad in threadbare wool. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. "Your Grace," he said, voice quavering. "I was a stonemason by trade, but my workshop was destroyed under Cersei's men. I beg a small loan to rebuild my livelihood. I can pay it back if you give me time." Daenerys descended 2 steps from the Iron Throne, unwilling to keep such distance between herself and the realm's humblest folk. "What is your name?" "Merrick, Your Grace." "Merrick, stonemasons are needed more than ever. We have great need of skilled hands to restore war-torn sections of the city. If we help you rebuild, do you pledge to use your craft for the good of King's Landing as well as yourself?" The old man's eyes brimmed with gratitude. "I swear it, my queen." She turned to a royal clerk who hovered nearby. A tall, bony man named Ricker with ink-stained fingers. "See that Master Merrick is given an advance of coin from the Crown's designated fund for rebuilding. He will coordinate with the Guild of Masons, which I am rechartering under the Master of Laws. Have them work out a schedule of repayment that will not place undue hardship on him." Ricker bowed brisk, and led the relieved stonemason away, already peppering him with questions about location, tools, the needed stones. As Daenerys returned to the throne, she saw that the next petitioner was a child, no more than 7, whose ragged cloak drowned his small frame. A city guard stood at the boy's side, shifting uncomfortably. The child held a battered wooden toy soldier in one dirty hand, as if for courage. "Your Grace," the guard explained with a nod at the child. "He was found wandering near Flea Bottom. He has no kin left. His mother died of fever, and the father was lost in the riots that broke out after Queen Cersei's men ransacked the district. He doesn't even know his own family name." Daenerys's heart twisted. She beckoned the boy closer. He took a step, uncertain but curious. "What is your name, child?" He shrugged, frightened. "Just Bryn." She forced a gentle smile. "Bryn, listen to me. I will see that you have food and shelter. The capital septas and septons are establishing a new orphan's home within the city walls. You are not alone. Will you allow them to care for you? They will keep you safe." His lower lip quivered as he nodded, tears threatening to spill. Daenerys felt tears threaten her own eyes in response. Another clerk, this one from the growing charitable order established by the High Septon, stepped forward to take the boy's hand and guide him from the throne room. Though the child's eyes darted from side to side, he seemed too tired to protest. Daenerys felt the tension in the hall ease. Long gone were the days of the Mad King, or even the short, venomous era of Queen Cersei, when children of the streets were treated as nuisances or worse. She stayed an hour longer, resolving local disputes. Boundary lines trampled by fleeing soldiers, a fisherman who claimed the crown owed him a small fee for the use of his boats during the final days of the war, and other such mundane matters. At last, the line of petitioners thinned and she dismissed the assembly for a midday recess. The city outside bustled in the warmth of a cloudless late spring day. Through the tall windows behind the throne, Daenerys could see rooftops shining beneath the sun, smoke curling from chimneys, laundry flapping on lines. Tyrion Lannister, her hand approached as the last petitioner slipped out of earshot. He wore fine but subdued garments of dark wine red, the hands badge gleaming at his breast. "A modest morning, your grace," he said wryly. "Only 2 or 3 disputes of inheritance, 5 pleas for crown funding, 1 orchard boundary squabble, and a child in need. And it's only midday." Daenerys's lips curved in a faint, tired smile. "Better than a battlefield strewn with corpses. I'll gladly handle orchard disputes if it means my people aren't living through constant war." He nodded, though a hint of worry lingered in his mismatched eyes. "Peace must be continually tended, like a garden. We've had small glimmers of unrest in the countryside, some old Lannister bannermen who resent losing favor, remnants of Sellswords who once served Euron Greyjoy. Nothing widespread, but the potential for banditry is real. We'll need to ensure the gold cloaks are well coordinated with local lords." She studied his face. "Send some of the Unsullied in small contingents if needed. I do not want terror unleashed on any hamlet or farm. We're trying to build trust." "Of course," Tyrion replied. "I'll speak with Grey Worm. He's proven adept at coordinating with local watchmen, though I'm not sure he entirely understands the intricacies of Westerosi feudal obligations. Still, no one can question his discipline." Daenerys nodded her thanks. She had come to rely on Grey Worm's sense of honor as well as Tyrion's political acumen. "I'll have an audience with the High Septon this evening to discuss expansions to the orphan relief. After that, I need to address the question of the Westerlands. Can't remain in limbo. The old seat of House Lannister is heavily depleted, but someone must oversee it." Tyrion's expression darkened briefly. House Lannister was, after all, his own birthright. Jaime had disappeared amid the chaos of Cersei's final days, and no one had confirmed his fate. Cersei herself had vanished without a trace. Whispers abounded that she might have boarded a ship, perhaps to the Free Cities, or perhaps drowned in the storm that battered the bay that same night. The official story in King's Landing was simply that she had abdicated under pressure from the city's own uprising. "Yes," Tyrion said softly, "Casterly Rock's treasury is diminished. Much of its gold was wasted by my father and siblings, but the fortress still stands. There are villages and towns along the coast that need leadership. Many remain uncertain of your intentions, though fewer daily, as the news of your merciful reign spreads. If you wish it, I will return there, ensure order is kept. But I would not presume to name myself Lord of Casterly Rock without your blessing. Even with my claim as the last Lannister in the main branch." He trailed off, unsettled by the thought. Daenerys understood the complicated ties that bound him. "I won't send you away unless you wish to go. The city needs its hand. But the Westerlands cannot remain neglected. Perhaps one of your loyal cousins or an appointed steward can manage it under your oversight. It would keep ties strong between the crown and the Westerlands." Tyrion exhaled in relief. "That might be best, at least for now. We'll consider the matter carefully. I'll gather names of men and women who might serve responsibly." A quick bow later, Tyrion departed to see to the day's myriad tasks. Daenerys, momentarily free, moved through the halls of the Red Keep. The corridors still bore the tapestry of old Targaryens, dusty and partially torn. Some depicted the triumphs of Aegon the Conqueror, others the glories and tragedies of later kings. She paused at one particularly faded panel that showed King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, famed for uniting warring factions through wisdom rather than fire. She found hope in that image, a reflection of her own aim. If Jaehaerys could once calm a realm rife with tension, perhaps she could do the same in these far darker times. She encountered Missandei in the hallway, gently scolding a courtier who had misplaced a stack of newly arrived messages. The young Nathi woman wore a pale lavender gown and carried herself with a quiet authority that belied her years. When she saw Daenerys approach, she ended her scolding with a polite nod and turned. "Your Grace," she greeted with a warm smile. "I was just about to bring you the latest ravens from the north and from Essos. There's also a message from Yara Greyjoy." Daenerys lifted her brows in mild curiosity. "Yara?" "Yes. She writes that she has reclaimed much of the Iron Islands from Euron's scattered men. She's requesting official recognition as Lady of the Iron Islands in your name, pledging her loyalty and the loyalty of her Ironborn if you confirm her title." Daenerys remembered Yara well, the fierce woman who had once offered her ships in exchange for independence. They had spoken of changing the old, reaver ways of the Ironborn. The Iron Islands have suffered enough under Euron's chaos. If Yara can bring them stability, we should welcome it. Prepare a royal proclamation in her favor. Include an invitation for her to come to King's Landing when she's able so we can formalize the arrangement. Missandei made a note on a small slate she carried. "Very good. And from the north, we have word that the spring thaw is well underway. Many villages are rebuilding." Jon Snow, she paused, searching Daenerys's face as she said his name. "He's written that the harvest from newly planted winter wheat may be better than expected. They're also repairing the fortress at Moat Cailin to improve trade routes southward. He sends cordial regards as always." Daenerys felt a familiar warmth stir within her at the mention of Jon's name. It had been months since they'd stood side by side in Winterfell after the Great War. She had spent weeks overseeing the beginnings of that reconstruction herself before returning to the capital to secure the throne. The realm needed leadership at its center, and the North needed its own leadership in Winterfell. Yet she found herself missing his presence, the quiet certainty in his gaze. "That's good news," she said, striving to keep her tone neutral. "We might arrange an expedition of masons, ironworkers, and farmers to assist them if they desire it." Missandei's smile turned knowing. "I'll send word at once, Your Grace." And from Essos, the city of Meereen has flourished under Dario Naharis's guidance, at least, according to the reports. Trade has increased with Volantis and Karth. Some freedmen wish to emigrate to Westeros, though travel across the sea remains costly. They seek opportunities here now that you've ascended the Iron Throne. Daenerys recalled her years across the narrow sea, the bond she'd formed with the countless freed slaves who had called her Mysa. It gladdened her to know Meereen endured. Let them come if they wish. We'll not bar them, but ensure there's a plan for them once they arrive. Jobs, housing, we don't want them exploited or left destitute in a foreign land. Missandei promised to coordinate with Tyrion. We'll find a way to sponsor their transition, perhaps setting them to work in reconstruction efforts across the Crownlands. Skilled laborers from Essos could blend well with local craftsmen. Daenerys agreed, then gently excused herself. She felt the day pressing upon her, the swirl of tasks and decisions waiting. Before the next council meeting, she wished to spend a moment in the Godwood, well, the meager equivalent of one that existed in King's Landing. The capital's Godwood was small, overshadowed by tall walls and overshadowed further by the royal sept, but it offered a patch of green respite from the city's unrelenting stone. She made her way through the courtyard, nodding to guards who saluted as she passed. Rhaegal glided overhead, a silent sentinel in the skies. Drogon remained perched on a tall turret of the Red Keep, his ever-watchful eyes scanning the horizon. The presence of her dragons had been a matter of both and concern to the populace. Yet weeks without them unleashing fire in the streets had eased many fears, and now their silhouettes overhead seemed less a threat and more an emblem of protection. The Godwood was scarcely more than a handful of old trees, none bearing the pale bark and red leaves of the northern weirwoods. A single slender heart tree had been planted decades ago at the insistence of a Stark bride, but it was no true weirwood. Nevertheless, Daenerys felt calmer the moment she stepped among the greenery. She found a bench beneath the shade of a tall elm and sank onto it, letting the hush settle around her. From somewhere above, a nightingale called even though the sun had yet to wane. The scent of loam and grass replaced the city's usual tang of salt and smoke. She remembered the first time she had ever felt truly at peace, perhaps the moment she realized she was carrying Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserions' eggs across the Red Waste, or else when the freed people of Ukai had called her Mysa. So many of those moments had been fleeting, overshadowed by new wars, new ambitions. Yet now each day seemed a slow step towards something gentler. Peace was not guaranteed, but it was at least possible. Her thoughts drifted, unbidden, to Jon Snow. He had risked everything alongside her to prove the truth of the Night King's threat. Had nearly died. had watched her lose Viserion. The memory of that heartbreak twisted in her chest. But from that trial, some deeper bond had formed between them, one that parted them with regret when Daenerys sailed south. A part of her longed to see him again, away from the press of courtiers and scribes, to speak with him in the quiet hush of evening. Perhaps soon, she told herself. Their responsibilities would permit it eventually. As she mulled that hope, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Ser Brienne of Tarth emerged from between two large oak trees, clad in a simpler version of her Kingsguard plate. She was not officially Lord Commander. Daenerys had not yet established the exact composition of her new Kingsguard, given the old order's corruption. But Brienne had become her principal protector nonetheless, standing vigil with unwavering loyalty. "Your Grace," Brienne said, dipping her head, "I hope to find you alone. May I speak freely?" Daenerys straightened. "You may always speak freely with me, Ser Brienne." Brienne's earnest blue eyes flicked around, ensuring no one eavesdropped. "I've heard unsettling rumors. Some men who once wore Lannister crimson are hiding in the hills near the Blackwater, claiming they'll restore a rightful Lannister monarchy. They talk of crowning some lost heir. Nothing more than gossip, perhaps, but dangerous if left unchecked." Daenerys pursed her lips, annoyance stirring. A pretender? Or a conjured story to rile the discontented? It could be either. I only know that my sources claim these men have stockpiles of old weapons from the war, possibly stolen from the city armory before Cersei fled. Daenerys let out a slow breath. "We cannot allow mercenary groups or bitter loyalists to disrupt the tenuous peace. But we also can't send an army every time discontents form a band. It would breed resentment. We'll handle it carefully. Tyrion should be informed. If we can persuade them peacefully to stand down, so much the better. If they won't yield, we'll see them disarmed. I refuse to turn a blind eye to banditry." Brienne nodded, relief in her posture. "I'll leave it to the hand's discretion. If a martial response is needed, the gold cloaks and local lords can handle it." "Thank you, Ser Brienne." She gave a small bow, then withdrew, her footsteps silent on the soft ground. Daenerys remained a moment longer, letting the scents and sounds of the tiny god would restore her. There would always be new threats, new pockets of strife. The wheel she'd promised to break was not undone in a single turning of seasons. But she had allies now and reason to hope that the realm would not fracture again. When she left the Godwood, she found Grey Worm waiting with the quiet efficiency that defined him. He informed her the small council was assembling in the Solar. Daenerys nodded and made for the meeting, crossing the labyrinthine corridors of the Red Keep until she reached the warmly lit room. A long oaken table dominated it, scattered with maps, ledgers, and half-written letters. The windows overlooked the city, the harbor's masts like thin spikes bristling against the horizon. Tyrion sat near the head of the table, carefully balancing a goblet of wine as he read some new dispatch. Varys stood by the window, hands clasped. He wore the same serene expression he always did, though Daenerys suspected his mind was never at rest. Missandei was there, conferring with Rickard about trade records, and Kono, a Dothraki bloodrider who'd learned a smattering of Westerosi common tongue, hovered uncertainly, still unaccustomed to the formalities of councils. Ser Davos Seaworth was also present, looking mildly uncomfortable in the presence of so much parchment and so many quills. Having served as a go-between for Daenerys and the North, Davos had grown into an invaluable advisor regarding the shipping lanes, trade routes, and the trust of the small folk. "Your Grace," Tyrion greeted, rising to his feet. The others followed suit. Daenerys motioned for them to sit. She took her seat at the head of the table. "We have many matters to discuss," she began. "First, Yara Greyjoy has requested formal recognition as Lady of the Iron Islands. I wish to grant it and invite her to King's Landing. Are we all agreed?" Davos ran a hand through his graying hair. I see no harm. The Ironborn will follow her if she's proven herself by ousting Euron's men. She'll want a measure of independence, no doubt. She and I once discussed letting the Iron Islands govern themselves so long as they didn't revert to reaving," Daenerys said. "I stand by that. Her loyalty to the crown and her vow to end the old ways of pillage is enough for me." Tyrion dipped his head. "We can draft the official documents this afternoon. This will strengthen our hold on the seas, ensuring no further opportunists harass shipping lanes." Varys inclined his head. a bland smile on his lips. A wise move, Your Grace. Stabilizing each region in turn will help the realm prosper. Next, Daenerys continued, we've had troubling reports of ex-Lannister loyalists near the Blackwater. Ser Brienne has already alerted me. I want to address them carefully. No public crackdowns that might sour relations with decent folk. Tyrion, can you coordinate with Lord Gendry Baratheon at Storm's End? That region is close enough to the Blackwater that his men might investigate discreetly. Gendry's loyalties are with us, but the Baratheon name could carry weight with rebellious knights who once served the crown. Perhaps it will persuade them to lay down arms. Tyrion nodded, tapping a quill against a sheet. An excellent idea. Gendry is well liked by commoners, and he has no love for Lannister loyalists. He might be able to coax them into surrendering. If they persist in their illusions of crowning some phantom Lannister, we'll proceed more forcefully. So Gendry had proven himself worthy of the seat at Storm's End, having been legitimized and recognized as Robert Baratheon's last living son. Davos had championed him and Daenerys had granted it, mindful of forging alliances with old houses by righting certain past wrongs. It seemed a fair outcome, one more cornerstone in a realm built on compromise rather than conquest. They moved to other topics: the progress of the city's reconstruction, the reorganization of the City Watch, negotiations with the Citadel in Old Town to send more maesters across the war-torn regions. More shipments of grain were on their way from the Reach, courtesy of the newly restructured lordship that Lady Olenna had once helmed, now guided by a Tyrell cousin and a few loyal bannermen. It all felt methodical, a slow weaving of broken threads. At length, the meeting ended and Daenerys rose, her shoulders tight from the hours of discussion. Tyrion called after her as she turned to go. Your Grace, there's a matter we've not addressed, if you'll spare me a moment. She paused, gesturing for him to continue. Tyrion exchanged glances with Varys. It concerns the succession. A hush settled over the room. Varys's inscrutable expression did not waver. Davos shifted uncomfortably. Missandei lowered her gaze, uncertain. Daenerys felt her stomach twist. She had known this topic would arise. She had claimed the throne, but she had no living children, and her ability to conceive after the loss of her son Rhaego remained in question. She had told herself it could wait, that she was young yet. But the lords were not blind to the realm's future. They wanted assurance that this fragile peace wouldn't crumble if Daenerys died unexpectedly. I've given it thought, she said carefully, but with the realm so newly at peace, I hesitated to name an heir. I wanted stability first. And well, it's complicated. Tyrion drew a breath. I understand, but the realm will want clarity. If, gods forbid, anything should happen to you, we must avoid another war of succession. Perhaps you might consider naming an heir among your closest allies, someone beloved by the realm or recognized by tradition. She felt the weight of that request barren. Down on her. Her mind flicked to Jon Snow. For a time, they had grown close. Then the revelations regarding his true parentage, Aegon Targaryen, Rhaegar's son, had threatened to cast everything into doubt. But in this gentler version of events, where the confrontation with Cersei never led to immediate war, had that revelation fully come to light? Samwell Tarly had discovered the truth in the Citadel's records, aided by Bran Stark's visions. They had told Jon. Yet Daenerys had asked them to keep it discreet for the time being, fearful that it would raise tension in an already fragile realm. Only a handful knew. Jon himself had shown little desire to press the claim. He'd said the realm needed unity, not more strife. But the knowledge lingered unspoken. She drew a slow breath, letting her gaze rest on Tyrion. We will talk of succession soon, but not now. My priority is to ensure the realm's recovery. In time, we'll formalize a process for choosing an heir, perhaps even a new tradition if it proves wise. But not yet. Tyrion studied her face, then inclined his head. As you say, Your Grace. I only ask that it not be postponed indefinitely. Varys dipped his head in agreement, but said nothing. Davos cleared his throat softly, indicating his own acceptance. Daenerys left them then, retreating to her private chambers. The truth was she did not know how best to handle the question of Jon's lineage or her own uncertain future as a mother. Yet she vowed she would not let the realm slip into chaos over it. If she had to, she might name a council of regents or pick a worthy successor by consensus of the lords, something akin to the Night's Watch choosing their lord commander. She would not cling to tradition for tradition's sake. Still, the notion clung to her like a persistent ache. She lit a single candle on her desk, trying to focus on letters that required her seal. The dancing flame reminded her of her dragons. It reminded her of the magical forces that had shaped her destiny. She did not regret that destiny, but sometimes she longed for the simpler life of a girl who'd never had to bear the burden of crowns. That evening, she met with the High Septon, a portly man with gentle eyes. He expressed gratitude for her continued support in rebuilding the city's septs and charitable houses. They discussed expansions to the orphans' refuge and ways to feed the poor through the winter. If a portion of the Crownland's harvest, once reaped, were set aside for the needy, it would do much to avert the famine that had ravaged King's Landing for years under incompetent rule. When the meeting ended, darkness had settled. Daenerys made her way through torchlit corridors, past yawning guards, to the upper ramparts. She liked to stand there beneath the stars, looking out over the city. A hush came over King's Landing at night, though it was never fully silent. The clamor of daytime melted into distant murmurs, the occasional bark of a dog, the faint rumble of wagons crossing the cobblestones. She heard a rush of air overhead, followed by a low growl that vibrated the stones beneath her feet. A smile tugged at her lips. Drogon had landed on the far side of the rampart, folding his great wings as he crawled closer. Steam rose from his nostrils in the cool night. Daenerys reached out a hand, feeling the warmth of his scales under her fingertips. "Hey there," she murmured, voice low. He let out a chuff, pressing his snout to her palm. She thought of Viserion, lost beyond the wall. Regal soared somewhere in the distance, likely scanning for prey to snatch from the waters of Blackwater Bay. She stayed like that for a time, content just to be near her oldest, fiercest companion. Around them, the city sprawled like a tapestry of flickering lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, petitions, decisions about the bandits near the Blackwater, perhaps more talk of the future. But tonight, she needed only this moment of quiet. The next morning, Daenerys awakened to swift news. A ship had arrived from the north, bearing Jon Snow himself, as well as several northern lords. They had come unexpectedly, though not unwelcomed. A spark of anticipation warmed her. She donned a simpler outfit of charcoal gray velvet lined with white fur at the collar, a nod to northern practicality, then hurried to the courtyard to greet them. When she arrived, she found Grey Worm, Missandei, and a handful of gold cloaks already assembled. The northern party disembarked from a stout ship bearing the Stark dire wolf banner. Jon stood at the forefront, wearing his thick cloak of dark fur. At his side were two other figures Daenerys recognized: Sansa Stark, her long auburn hair bound in a modest braid, and Arya Stark, slender and sharp-eyed as ever. A handful of northern guards accompanied them, and near the back, Daenerys glimpsed Brienne of Tarth with Podrick, looking mildly surprised to see Arya again. Jon's dark eyes found hers the moment he set foot on the dock. 1,000 unsaid words seemed to pass between them. Daenerys waited, conscious of the bright sunlight glancing off the water. Finally, she descended the short flight of steps and greeted him formally. "Welcome to King's Landing, King in the North," she said, inclining her head slightly. "Thank you for receiving us on such short notice, Your Grace." Jon's tone held a careful politeness, but beneath it his eyes spoke of relief. "My sisters wished to see how the realm's capital fares, and I had matters to discuss with your council." Sansa stepped forward, dipping in a graceful curtsy that still hinted at the North's proud independence. "Your Grace, I'm pleased to see King's Landing in one piece. I remember all too well how close it came to destruction more than once." Arya, more direct, simply gazed at Daenerys. "It's strange being here again after all that's happened. The city looks calmer than I expected." Daenerys offered a slight smile. "The calm is new, but we're working to keep it." Then she returned her attention to Jon. "You're always welcome. We'll make arrangements for your party to stay in comfortable quarters. And I'll convene my council so we might discuss these matters you bring." As they walked into the Red Keep, Daenerys found herself stealing glances at Jon, who walked beside her. He moved with the same quiet grace as always, though she sensed a fatigue in him. The burdens of leadership weighed heavily, even if the threat of the dead was now ended. No words of affection passed between them in front of the others, only courteous conversation about the North's efforts to replant crops and stabilize trade. Once they reached the private solar, the northern visitors took seats around the large table. Tyrion poured wine and offered bread, cheese, and dried figs from the Reach. Davos, Missandei, Varys, and Grey Worm joined as well. Sansa, Arya, and Jon removed their cloaks, settling in. The tension in the room felt subdued, more a sense of many new relationships overlapping. Sansa's guarded expression suggested she did not entirely trust all the Southerners present, even if she bore them no ill will. Jon explained the reason for their sudden arrival. Scattered rumors suggested pockets of wildlings were moving south again, fleeing some harsh new conditions or conflicts beyond the wall. Tormund Giantsbane, stationed at Castle Black with a handful of free folk, had sent a raven stating that small groups wanted entry into the gift lands south of the wall. The Night's Watch itself was down to a skeleton crew, unsure how to handle the new wave of wildlings. "We have no desire for another confrontation," Jon said, lacing his fingers. "They're not an invading force, merely families seeking better lands. But the North is still recovering. Some lords worry about letting more wildlings roam their fields, hunting game, possibly clashing with northern villagers. I wanted to consult with you, Your Grace, to see if there's a broader realm-wide policy we might adopt." Daenerys' eyes flicked around the table. She knew well enough that the free folk had nearly been destroyed by the undead, and it was thanks to Jon that many had survived. She had no hatred for them. They fought with us against the Night King. I've no desire to see them turn into refugees forever. Yet the North has limited resources. Perhaps we could encourage some to resettle in other regions, unclaimed lands in the Riverlands or the Crownlands. Sansa, thoughtful, tapped a finger on the table's edge. That would require careful oversight. The wildlings are not used to southern ways. They might clash with local lords. Arya snorted. Them local lords should learn not to provoke them. We're all on the same side now, aren't we? Jon shot Arya a look that was half amused, half exasperated. We are. But people fear what's different. Tyrion stepped in. As the realm's population is smaller since the wars, resettling free folk in underpopulated areas could actually benefit local economies, provided we have some transitional guidance. We'd need a plan for how they can integrate or not if they prefer to keep their own customs. The key is preventing friction with existing small folk or bannermen. Varys lifted his hands in a mild gesture. I can speak to some lords in the Riverlands. Much of that region is still scarred from the War of the Five Kings. Fields lie fallow for want of hands to till them, villages remain half-empty. If these free folk are willing to learn new trades and live peacefully, some local lords might welcome the additional labor. Daenerys nodded, her decision coming swiftly. Then let's do it. Coordinate with Tormund to identify who wants to come south. We'll create a path for them, a chance to settle safely. We won't force them anywhere they don't wish to be, but we'll offer options. If any lords reject the idea outright, they can petition me directly and state their reasons. She cast a glance at Jon, whose face glowed with appreciation. Thank you, he said quietly. This means much to them and to me. Too many have died. We don't need more bloodshed. Sansa gave a small nod of agreement. I'm sure some northern lords will complain, but if it's done gradually, it could work. I've seen how your administration handles delicate matters. If you keep that fairness, the North might come to accept it. They spoke of other northern concerns, the slow repair of Moat Cailin, the possibility of establishing a better road between Winterfell and White Harbor. In turn, Tyrion updated them on the developments in King's Landing, how bread prices had decreased thanks to shipments from the Reach, how the new City Watch was cracking down on corruption, how Daenerys planned to open the port to certain free trade agreements with Bravos. Sansa listened attentively. Arya occasionally asked pointed questions that made Tyrion blink. Finally, the meeting wound down. Missandei and Varys departed to handle letters. Grey Worm excused himself to check on the Unsullied. Sansa suggested that she and Arya explore the city discreetly, taking a small escort. She wanted to see how the people truly fared outside the Red Keep's walls. Davos volunteered to guide them, being well acquainted with the city's layout and hidden corners. That left only Jon, Daenerys, and Tyrion in the Solar. Tyrion sensed the unspoken tension and politely took his leave, winking at Daenerys as he went. She pretended not to notice. When they were alone, an almost tangible hush settled, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. Daenerys looked at Jon, searching his face. You're tired, she said softly. Are you sleeping poorly? He offered a faint smile. Leading's never easy, and I've had a belly full of it. But the North is mending. With each day, the scars from the war heal a little more. A moment passed. She reached out, resting her fingers on his calloused hand. I'm glad you came. He turned his hand to lace his fingers with hers. A warmth passed between them, too long in coming. I wish I'd come sooner, but I feared leaving the North for too long would unsettle the lords. They've only just accepted a Southern Queen's rule. Though we all saw how you fought for the living. Some remain wary of Targaryens, given your father's history. She tightened her grip slightly, acknowledging the truth of it. I cannot change the past, only prove through each day that I'm not my father. The more we work together, the more they'll see that. Sansa, Arya, your people, I want them to feel safe, not conquered." Jon nodded. For a moment, he looked as though he wanted to say more. Something deeper, personal. Then he simply exhaled. If only all problems could be solved by stabbing ice zombies. Politics is far more complicated. That coaxed a wry laugh from her. "You've no idea how many days I wish to mount Drogon and roast the paperwork instead of reading it." His brow furrowed in mild alarm. Then he realized she was joking and gave a quiet chuckle. They allowed a pause of shared memory. The Great War, the alliance forged beyond the wall, the night they'd nearly lost everything to the Night King. Through that crucible, they'd come to trust each other, to see each other's hearts. Now, with the threat of the dead gone, the question remained. Would they simply drift apart, or could they find a new bond in this fragile peace? Jon's next words were measured. "There's something else weighing on me. The truth Sam and Bran discovered. We agreed to keep it quiet for now. But how long can that last?" Daenerys felt her chest tighten. She knew exactly what he meant. That Jon was, by blood, Aegon Targaryen, son of Prince Rhaegar, and thus held a stronger claim to the Iron Throne than she did under traditional rules. It was a twist of fate that could have undone everything if known widely. But Jon had never wanted to usurp her. He had bent the knee willingly once, before even learning his heritage. She spoke gently. "Perhaps, if we maintain peace, it will never need to be widely known. Or if it is, it might not matter if we stand together." His gaze flicked to the floor, conflict evident in the tightness of his jaw. "What if the lords discover it? What if they demand I press my claim? I don't want the throne. And I don't want you to hide who you are," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "It's cruel to ask you to deny your parentage, but this realm has so many fresh wounds. Another challenge to the throne, even if only rumored, could reopen them." He looked up. "I'd never challenge you. You know that." She allowed herself to rest her other hand on his shoulder, leaning closer. "I do know, but you're not the only one who might use such knowledge to undermine me. That's why I asked you and Sam and Bran to keep it quiet, at least for now." He touched her cheek, the calluses of his fingertips brushing her skin. A quiet moment stretched, heavy with unspoken affection. Then footsteps in the hall made them draw apart. Tyrion's voice drifted closer, accompanied by another counselor. They stepped back, masks of regal composure sliding into place. Tyrion peered in, an apologetic smile on his face. "My queen, Jon Snow, sorry to intrude, but a raven has arrived from Lord Gendry. He's discovered something interesting about those bandits near the Blackwater. Apparently they're being funded by an unknown sponsor with foreign gold." Daenerys sighed. There was always another puzzle. "Thank you, Tyrion. We'll be right there." Jon cast her a warm, lingering look, as if to say we will finish this conversation, then followed her from the solar. Business first, always. The realm demanded it. In the days that followed, the northern visitors settled into the Red Keep. Sansa spent hours conversing with the city steward about the supply lines from the Reach. Arya roamed about with the Hound, who had grudgingly joined the Queen's cause after the war, visiting corners of the city where she'd once wandered as a girl. She found them changed. Some of the chaos was gone. Small shops had opened, desperate for new beginnings. Where the Street of Steel had once rung with Lannister arms forging, now it boasted blacksmiths making plows and tools for reconstruction. Jon and Daenerys, meanwhile, continued to sit side by side in council meetings. More news arrived regarding the bandits near the Blackwater. Gendry's men had captured 2 ringleaders. Under questioning, they confessed that a merchant from Pentos had supplied them with coin and gear, hoping to destabilize the region. The motive remained unclear, but suspicion fell upon exiled loyalists or outlaws who might have ties to the Golden Company or other foreign mercenaries. Daenerys ordered the matter investigated thoroughly, not wanting outside forces to sow chaos in Westeros ever again. Their joint authority, Jon Snow's presence as the king in the north, Daenerys as the crowned monarch, lent weight to every edict. Lords who might have doubted a lone Targaryen found themselves reassured by the North's cooperation. Northern lords who once eyed southern rule with hostility saw that their own king sat in council with the queen, an equal partner, not a supplicant. Each day, the realm's unity grew stronger. One afternoon, Daenerys decided to show Jon the dragons again. She led him up the winding steps to the expansive courtyard near the Red Keep's highest ramparts, where Drogon and Rhaegal often perched in the midday sun. Rhaegal, recovering still from the scars of the undead Viserions' assault, had become somewhat reclusive, but he perked up at the sight of Jon. Drogon, as ever, regarded all but Daenerys with a haughty glare. Jon reached out a cautious hand to Rhaegal's flank. The dragon emitted a soft rumble that Daenerys interpreted as acceptance. "He remembers you," she told Jon. "From beyond the wall, from our battles." Jon's eyes sparkled with awe. "He's still magnificent. I'm grateful he survived." Daenerys pressed her palm to Drogon's side. The beast's scales radiated warmth. "I lost Viserion. I can't bear to lose another." Her voice caught. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of silent comfort. Rhaegal lowered his head, exhaling a gust of hot breath. It ruffled Jon's dark curls, but he did not flinch. Daenerys watched them, thoughts slipping back to the rumor of his Targaryen blood. Did the dragons sense it? Did Rhaegal feel some distant kinship with this man named for his sire? She breathed in. "When I first hatched them, I never imagined they'd grow so large or so important. They're a reminder of the fire I can wield, but also of the responsibility it brings." Jon nodded. "You've proven you won't wield that fire carelessly. That's why people trust you." A quiet overcame them, broken only by Drogon's low growl. A swirl of heat, a swirl of memory. Then a messenger arrived, bowing stiffly and announcing that the queen's presence was needed in the throne room. Another of the day's tasks. Daenerys cast one last affectionate glance at her dragons, then led Jon down the stairs. In the throne room, a small crowd had gathered. At its center stood a tall woman in battered iron armor, cloak pinned with a kraken sigil. Yara Greyjoy, fresh off her ship. Her dark hair was tied back, a cut healing across her forehead. Her face lit up when Daenerys approached. "Your Grace," Yara said in a voice that carried the tang of salt air, "I came as soon as I received your summons, or invitation, rather. The Iron Islands are mine again." There was pride in her voice, but also a certain weight. "The fighting was fierce at first, but Euron's men are scattered or dead now. My people want to forge a new path, less pillaging, more honest trade. I'm here to affirm our oaths." Daenerys descended the short flight of steps from the throne, meeting Yara at eye level. "I'm glad to hear it. I meant what I said before. If you keep the Ironborn from reaving the coasts, I'll grant you the autonomy you seek. You've my gratitude for driving out Euron's influence." Yara's lips curved in a faint grin. "Now we just have to find that bastard if he's still alive. Rumor says he's either hiding in Essos or at the bottom of the sea. Good riddance either way." Jon, standing off to one side, studied Yara with polite curiosity. They'd met only briefly once, but now their roles were more settled. Yara offered him a curt nod. "King in the north. Glad to see you still breathing. Heard about your feats up north with the dragons." Jon returned the nod. "Same to you. Surviving a Greyjoy civil war can't be easy." Yara gave a dry chuckle. "Let's just say the drowned god is probably tired of me by now." Then she turned back to Daenerys. "I've brought gifts. A load of fish from the seas near Pike, salted and smoked, plus some ironwork from our smiths. A token of good faith. I trust that means we can finalize this arrangement." Daenerys's chin lifted. "Indeed, I'll have Tyrion prepare the official documents. It grants you the titles of Lady of the Iron Islands and your own local governance. So long as you recognize my authority as queen, do not practice raiding on Westerosi shores, and contribute men or ships if the realm is threatened." Yara nodded briskly. "Agreed." The onlookers murmured in approval. It was another piece of the realm's puzzle slotting into place. Daenerys glanced up at Missandei, who stood ready with parchment and quill. "Let it be proclaimed. Send word to the major ports so that the Ironborn's shift in leadership and policy is recognized across Westeros. We want no further conflict at sea." Before Yara left the throne room, she paused to speak quietly with Daenerys, away from curious ears. They say you took the throne without burning the city. I saw enough destruction in Meereen to know what your dragons can do. Why spare King's Landing if you had the power? Daenerys studied her. Because I saw what pointless destruction does to people. I want the realm to be better than it was under my father or under Cersei. If that means letting my enemies yield peacefully, I'll give them the chance. Yara considered that, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a half-smile. You're a different sort of Targaryen, no doubt. Let's hope it keeps. They parted, and soon Yara was on her way to the Red Keep's courtyard to meet with Tyrion and formalize the last details. Daenerys felt a kind of relief settle over her. One more region pacified, one less corner of the realm simmering with rebellion. Night fell again, and the flickering torches in the halls cast dancing shadows. Daenerys found herself unusually restless. She paced her chambers, rereading the day's stack of messages with dwindling attention. At last, unable to sleep, she pulled a cloak over her nightdress and stepped into the corridor, deciding to walk the keep's quieter passages. Perhaps the hush would calm her. She wound up on a terrace overlooking the sea. The black water shimmered under moonlight, and the ramparts were deserted save for a single guard far off, half hidden behind a crenellation. To her surprise, Jon stood near the parapet, gazing out over the starlit bay. He had evidently been just as restless. He turned at her approach, face softening. Couldn't sleep? She shook her head. Too much in my mind. She joined him by the edge, leaning forward on her forearms. The breeze tasted of salt, ruffling her loose silver hair. You. Similar reasons. He paused. This city looks so different from when I came here as a boy. Back then I was nobody, a bastard from the north. I never imagined I'd stand here as king in the north, or that he hesitated, stand beside a Targaryen queen. She smiled gently, turning her head to watch him. The roads we take are rarely the ones we expect. They fell quiet for a long moment, letting the night envelop them. Regal soared overhead, a silent silhouette against the moon, reassuring in its majesty. Waves lapped the shore below, their soft murmur rising along the stone walls. At last, Jon angled his body toward her. In the moonlight, she could see the sincerity etched in every line of his face. I sometimes wonder, he said quietly, if we might find a way to share this burden. You as queen of the 7 kingdoms, me as king in the north. We work well together, but always parted by miles of road or sea. Must it be so? Her heart thudded. I've wondered that too, she admitted. But I also worry about giving the realm any reason to fear a forced union. After all it's been through, forcing the North to kneel in a marriage might be seen as conquest by other means. And I know Sansa has her doubts. He nodded. It wouldn't be forced if it's by mutual choice. And the North respects me enough to accept it if they believe it's truly in their best interest, not something done out of lust for power. They know me, know I care nothing for the crown. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I do care for you, Jon, more than I expected. But I'm also queen to an entire realm. My decisions aren't just my own. Jon took her hand gently. She let him. If we can show the realm that our union is based on trust and respect, we might unite them more fully than ever. I saw how you treat the orphan in Flea Bottom the same as a lord. That's the sort of queen I'd pledge my life to. Her cheeks grew warm. She looked out at the horizon, the moon's reflection shimmering. Perhaps, she said softly, perhaps we should see what the realm thinks. Or perhaps we do not ask their permission at all. We simply do what is right for us and trust them to see its value. Jon's grip on her hand tightened slightly. She could feel his rough palm, the slight tremor that belied how momentous this conversation was. I won't push, he said, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I'm here, if you want me. Daenerys felt a surge of emotion so strong it took her breath. She turned to face him fully, close enough that she could see the faint scar near his eye, the swirl of gray in his dark irises. I do want you, she whispered. The words were quiet but honest as any vow. We'll find a way, one that doesn't tear the realm apart. Jon nodded. For a moment, neither moved. Then the tension broke and they kissed under the moonlight, an unspoken promise that perhaps the realm could accept a union born of mutual respect and love rather than the forced marriages of old. Far below them, the sea murmured against stone like a lullaby reminding them that dawn would always come after the darkest night. They parted before any guard could stumble upon the scene, returning separately to their chambers. The next morning, however, their closeness did not go unnoticed by those who were keen observers, Tyrion, for one, wearing a slight, knowing smile. Sansa, for another, whose expression grew complicated when she realized what might be unfolding. The realm itself did not yet know, nor did it need to. Daenerys and Jon took small steps, forging a path that might lead to something more official when the time was right. In the days that followed, the northern delegation began preparing to return home, satisfied with the agreements on the free folk, the commerce plans, and the reaffirmation of alliances. Arya had found her time in King's Landing enlightening. She told Daenerys privately that the city seemed less oppressive, though she remained wary of any place so rife with hidden corners and hidden knives. Sansa, for her part, gave Daenerys a polite but measured farewell. "We want peace," Sansa said, meeting Daenerys' gaze. "I believe you do too. If you and Jon are... Well, if you decide to unite your claim with his, it could stabilize things. Or it could raise old fears about Targaryen dominion over the north. The outcome depends on your actions." Daenerys nodded with calm composure. "I understand. I have no desire to subjugate the north. Our alliance will be one of equals." Sansa's expression softened, though her eyes remained sharp. "Then I wish you good fortune, your grace." With that, the Starks departed by ship, vanishing into the watery distance. Daenerys felt their absence keenly, especially Jon's. Yet she knew she would see him again. Letters carried on swift ravens promised as much. She clung to the memory of his warmth on the terrace. She had no illusions that any betrothal or marriage would be simple, but for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than just the endless toil of ruling. Life in King's Landing rolled on. The bandit problem near the Blackwater subsided after Gendry and a detachment of gold cloaks cornered the worst offenders. The foreign sponsor from Pentos remained elusive, but Varys' network began untangling the threads. Yara Greyjoy took her official oath of fealty in the throne room, a ceremony that drew cheers from sailors and watchers in the port. Word spread across the narrow sea that Daenerys Targaryen was forging alliances without devastation, that King's Landing stood stronger by day. There were still difficulties. A small riot broke out in Flea Bottom over a dispute between two local gangs that had once thrived under Cersei's corrupt watch. Daenerys had to dispatch the new City Watch to quell the violence. She ordered they take care not to kill unnecessarily. A handful of ringleaders were arrested, but no wanton bloodshed ensued. It was a far cry from the old brutal purges that might have occurred in the past. She also faced a challenge from certain conservative lords in the Westerlands who demanded that Tyrion return to Casterly Rock and restore it as the seat of House Lannister. Tyrion resisted. He found more purpose in serving his hand, shaping the realm's policies. At last, Daenerys offered a compromise. A younger cousin of Tyrion, a level-headed youth named Martin Lannister, would govern under Tyrion's nominal authority. Martin, still in his early 20s, agreed to the arrangement if Tyrion would occasionally advise him from afar. Thus the Rock was not leaderless, and Tyrion remained in King's Landing, content to serve the crown. Time passed. The realm's slow healing continued. Harvests trickled in from the Crownlands, the Riverlands, the Reach. Dorne, under a new coalition of Dornish houses, found a renewed sense of identity and prosperity, shipping exotic wines and spices north. The Iron Bank of Bravos, seeing the realm's stability, offered more favorable loans to assist in grand reconstruction projects. Daenerys made certain to repay them steadily, not wanting the crown enslaved by debt again. Weeks turned into a pair of months. One bright morning, a raven arrived from Winterfell bearing the wax seal of House Stark. Missandei delivered it to Daenerys, who opened it with a trembling sense of anticipation. Inside, Jon's neat but unornamented script conveyed that the North had gathered for the Harvest Festival, that prospects looked bright, and that his people, while still cautious, recognized Daenerys' kindness in sending additional masons, carpenters, and surplus grain. In a postscript he wrote, "I miss you. Once our duties permit, I'll come south. Or you can come here. Winterfell is not so cold as it once was. Our roads are safer these days, thanks to the banners you helped unify. Until then, do not forget our words on the terrace." Daenerys smiled at that. She turned to Missandei. Prepare for a trip, she said impulsively. I'll visit the north myself. Quietly, with a small retinue. I want to see what's been achieved with my own eyes. And I wish to speak with Jon about the future. Missandei's face lit with excitement. Shall I inform the council? Yes, of course. Tyrion will oversee day-to-day affairs in my absence. We'll take the Unsullied in small number. Let's not arrive with an army. And have Gendry, Davos, or any other ally who wishes to come accompany us. This will be a demonstration of our bond. Preparations commenced swiftly. Tyrion teased her about the royal romance, though he admitted it could be wise for the realm if handled with caution. Varys expressed mild concern about leaving King's Landing, but she assured him it would be only for a short while and that the city had grown far more stable. Grey Worm readied a unit of Unsullied for the journey while Missandei arranged the logistics. Within a fortnight, a modest procession set forth from the capital, fewer than 100 in total, including guards, servants, and courtiers. Daenerys flew a portion of the way on Drogon, with Regal following at a distance while the rest traveled by horse or wagon. The roads were in decent condition thanks to the new lordly cooperation. Village after village greeted them with curiosity and, in many cases, warm welcomes, as the presence of dragons overhead had become less terrifying, more a sign that the realm's queen was near. Crossing the neck into the north took time. The landscape gradually shifted from the gentler slopes of the riverlands to the harsher terrain of the north. By the time they drew near Winterfell, the winds carried a frosty edge, though it was still early autumn. The trees had begun to turn, a blaze of color that contrasted sharply with the gray skies. Finally, one crisp afternoon, the towers of Winterfell rose on the horizon. Smoke curled from its chimneys, giving the place a welcoming aspect. The gates stood open, guarded by Northmen in thick cloaks. One of them shouted a greeting, and soon the courtyard bustled with excitement as Daenerys's party entered. Grooms hurried to take horses, and curious onlookers peered from windows. Jon emerged from within the castle walls, cloak billowing around him. Daenerys dismounted from her horse, her legs stiff from days of riding. They locked eyes across the courtyard. The subtle smile on his face warmed her more than any fur cloak could. She walked toward him, ignoring the hush of spectators. He, in turn, met her halfway, and they clasped hands in a gesture that spoke volumes. A few of the Northmen grumbled or muttered, but no one openly objected. They were well aware of the alliance that had kept them alive against the dead. "Welcome to Winterfell," Jon said, voice soft enough that only she could hear. "I'm glad you came." She squeezed his hand. "So am I." Sansa appeared behind Jon, wearing a formal gown of gray and white, lined with a mantle of fox fur. Her greeting to Daenerys was polite, perhaps even genuine. Arya lurked not far, giving a small nod. Bran Stark, too, watched from his wheeled chair with an unreadable expression. The rest of the retinue dismounted, with Grey Worm ensuring the Unsullied positioned themselves unobtrusively near the courtyard's edges. The tension that had once existed between the North and Daenerys's foreign guards seemed less pronounced. There was caution, yes, but also acceptance that these men, too, had fought for the North's survival. Jon led Daenerys inside, showing her the transformations Winterfell had undergone since the war. The courtyard was full of stacked lumber, stone blocks, and fresh supplies. The keep's walls had been reinforced with newly quarried rock. A portion of the old towers damaged in the fighting had been rebuilt better than before. Most strikingly, the Great Hall boasted new tapestries and thick rugs, a testament to the North's slow revival. Tables were laden with the produce of an autumn harvest. Turnips, carrots, cabbages, onions, salted meats, and even some southern fruits brought in by traveling merchants. For a region once so close to ruin, it was a reassuring sight. They feasted that night in the Great Hall, with the lords and ladies of the North attending. Daenerys sat at the high table beside Jon and Sansa. Many eyes watched her, some still wary, others simply curious. She was Targaryen and foreign, but she'd proven her mettle in battle. The wine was poured and toasts were raised. Jon spoke of unity, praising Daenerys' assistance in these uncertain times. In response, she lauded the North's resilience, calling them the realm's shield. A good cheer rumbled through the crowd, if not rapturous applause. The North would never be effusive in their praise, but they recognized sincerity. Later, after the mead and ale had flowed freely, music echoed off the rafters. A few lords broke into half-hearted dancing. Arya slipped away, perhaps uninterested in the revelry, while Sansa mingled with various bannermen. Daenerys found herself stepping outside to breathe in the cold night air, aware that too much warmth and wine stifled her. She wandered the courtyard, half expecting to see one of her dragons perched on a tower. But neither Drogon nor Rhaegal was in sight. They had likely flown off to hunt in the snow-laden forests. A gentle hush lay over Winterfell's yard, punctuated by the distant chorus of insects. She wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders. A moment later, she heard footsteps crunch lightly in the thin layer of frost. Jon appeared at her side, his dark hair ruffled by the breeze. Escaping the festivities? She gave him a playful smile. It's a bit stifling. Besides, I wanted to see Winterfell by moonlight. It's beautiful in its own stark way. He nodded. The north has its charm if you can bear the cold. Then his tone softened. Walk with me. She agreed, and they made their way through a covered walkway into the godwood. Here, the leaves still clung to the branches, a tapestry of gold, orange, and crimson. The ancient weirwood with the carved face stood silent, sap-red eyes gazing over the reflection pool. Crisp leaves crackled underfoot. Jon stopped near the heart tree, turning to her in the dim glow of moon and torchlight. I'm grateful you came, he said again, more quietly. The North needed to see you, not just hear tales. Sansa needed to see you. And I? She inhaled the scent of wood smoke and pine, her breath steaming in the chill air. I needed to see you too. We've been dancing around this possibility, the notion that we might stand together not just as allies but as something more. Are you sure it won't fracture the North? He lifted her hand, pressing it to his chest. She felt the steady beat of his heart through the layers of wool and leather. The North follows me because they trust me. They know I'd never lead them into ruin. If I pledge myself to you, not just politically, they'll see it as a means to strengthen the realm. They might grumble, but they won't revolt. Daenerys's voice caught. If we do this, we'll face new questions. The realm will ask about heirs, about your parentage. I want them to accept us without suspicion or fear. Jon's expression grew grave. We can't hide the truth forever. Sam and Bran can corroborate my birth. If we marry and that secret comes out later, some might say I had a more legitimate claim to the throne. That could cause strife. Or we could reveal it now, show that I choose to stand beside you, not over you. That might quell talk of me undermining your authority. She considered that heart-pounding. The idea of telling the realm that Jon was, by blood, Aegon Targaryen, the rightful male heir to the Iron Throne, frightened her. Yet, if it was disclosed in the context of a marriage, where he explicitly renounced any higher claim, perhaps it would unify the realm more strongly. She felt the swirl of possibility. It was terrifying, but also thrilling. Her voice wavered. I love you, she said, admitting what had been building in her heart. And that love is strong enough to endure what might come. But the realm might not be so quick to embrace a new Targaryen line. We need to be sure. His hand rose to cup her cheek. I love you. I want to stand with you. I've lost enough in this world to know that if I have a chance at happiness, I should seize it. Our union could heal old wounds if we handle it right. She took a shaky breath. Then let's do it. We'll consult with those we trust. Tyrion, Davos, Sansa, Sam, Bran. We'll plan how to reveal your parentage. We'll show the realm that you choose me as queen, and we choose each other as partners. No forced bending of the knee, no subjugation. Jon's smile glimmered in the moonlight. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. We'll do it together. His voice was a gentle promise in the cold night. She nodded, letting her eyes close, a profound sense of relief and excitement flooding her. They embraced then under the heart tree, the ancient boughs arching overhead like silent witnesses. The godswood felt sacred, a place where old magic and old gods watched them with patient acceptance. If the realm could see them now, they would behold two people forged in war, battered by loss, yet united by the hope of a gentler tomorrow. The next morning dawned crisp and bright. Daenerys and Jon summoned those they trusted, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Davos, Tyrion by Raven. As he remained in King's Landing, Samwell Tarly, who was at Winterfell studying old records, gathered in a private chamber. They spoke of the plan. The air was thick with tension. Sansa's expression was guarded, Arya's watchful, Sam's anxious. Bran alone looked serene, as if he'd already seen how this would unfold. Daenerys took the lead, explaining how they wished to wed. But there is a truth that could complicate matters. Jon is not Ned Stark's bastard. He is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, born in secret. Sansa's eyes widened, though she'd gleaned hints of this. Arya let out a soft exhale, crossing her arms. Sam, who had discovered the marriage record that proved Rhaegar and Lyanna wed in Dorne, nodded in confirmation. Bran spoke up in his distant tone. I saw it in my visions. It's true. Jon picked up the thread. If this becomes public, it means I have a stronger claim by traditional succession. But I do not want the Iron Throne. Daenerys is our queen. I will stand by her. If we reveal the truth in the same moment we announce our marriage, perhaps it will quell any rumor that I seek to usurp her. Sansa's gaze flicked between them. She breathed out, carefully shaping her response. This is momentous. Many in the North won't like the idea that you're half Targaryen. They followed you because you're Ned Stark's son. But if they see that it's all in the name of unity, maybe they'll accept it. Arya shrugged. If they don't, that's their problem. You've proven yourself to them. And she saved the North from the dead. They owe you both. Sam looked pensive. You'll need a careful approach. People fear Targaryens. And some might see a Targaryen man as a better choice than a Targaryen woman if they cling to old misogynistic ways. You must make it absolutely clear that you are not dethroning Daenerys. Bran's voice carried a strange finality. The truth must be known, or it becomes a poison. Show them your unity. Let them see you stand side by side. Sansa studied Daenerys for a long moment. Then she said, more gently than Daenerys expected, I see your devotion to each other. If this is what you truly want, I won't stand in the way. I only ask that you keep the North's interests at heart. Daenerys offered a small, grateful nod. Of course. We mean to protect every region that joined us against the dead. The North most of all. Jon and Daenerys exchanged glances. A sense of determination settled in the room. The path ahead was set, though not without its dangers. They would travel back south, or perhaps summon key lords to Winterfell, or hold a grand council to announce both the truth of Jon's parentage and their betrothal. The details could be ironed out, but the decision was made. Over the next week, messages flew back and forth between Winterfell and King's Landing. Tyrion, upon hearing the plan, replied with uncharacteristic brevity. Gods help us all, but I think it might work. You have my support, as always. We'll arrange a grand assembly in King's Landing, where lords from every region can witness the announcement. With each passing day, Daenerys felt the swirl of tension coalesce into purpose. She walked Winterfell's grounds, noticing how the small folk there seemed calmer, more confident, their bellies fuller than in the bleak days of the war. She smiled at passing children who wore thick woolen mittens. She watched as masons hammered away at repairs, forging new beams from the lumber she'd helped send. Jon accompanied her on these walks, at times leaning in to share quiet words. They talked of the future, how to structure a realm that balanced local autonomy with royal oversight, how to continue rebuilding roads and ports, how to keep the realm from sliding back into petty feuds. Their vision aligned. The more they spoke, the more certain they became that forging a marriage bond would not be an empty symbol, but a real unification of minds and hearts. Then came the day they were to depart for King's Landing, to set in motion the final step. The courtyard thronged with Stark bannermen, northern folk, and some who simply wished to see the queen off. Daenerys bade farewell to Sansa, who would remain behind to govern the north while Jon traveled with Daenerys. Arya, too, chose to stay. She had little interest in the pomp of courtly gatherings, preferring her quiet, roving life. Bran offered them his cryptic blessing, though Daenerys sensed he might appear in King's Landing one day if he so wished. The realm had yet to fully understand the scope of Bran's abilities. When Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back, Jon mounted Regal, a sight that caused gasps among the gathered. Though he had flown only rarely, Regal tolerated him. Side by side, the two dragons took wing, overshadowing the keep. Below, their retinue set out by horse and carriage, expecting a slower journey south. With powerful beats of their wings, Drogon and Regal soared into the gray sky, carrying their riders toward a new chapter in Westeros's history. The flight was exhilarating, the wind cold and sharp, but the sense of freedom unmatched. Daenerys glanced over, spotting Jon guiding Regal carefully. His cloak whipped behind him, and she saw the thrill in his eyes, a smile that rarely surfaced in daily cares. They soared above rolling hills and forests, each day descending to camp where their retinue eventually caught up. The presence of 2 dragons overhead deterred any possible bandits, and the journey was peaceful. At last, King's Landing's walls came into view under the late afternoon sun. The city was alive with movement, ships in the bay, carts on the roads. As Drogon and Rhaegal circled overhead, a cheer rose from many in the streets, echoed by the city watch who recognized their queen's return. The 2 dragons landed in the spacious courtyard near the Red Keep, left mostly clear for this purpose. Soldiers and servants rushed forward, eyes wide at the sight of both Daenerys and Jon dismounting from separate dragons. Tyrion, waiting in the courtyard, let out a theatrical sigh of relief that they'd arrived in one piece. "Quite the entrance," he remarked. "The city is abuzz already." Daenerys, with hair windswept, embraced him lightly. Jon clapped the dwarf on the shoulder in greeting. They moved inside. Over the next few days, Daenerys convened a grand assembly in the throne room, summoning lords from near and far. The Riverlands, the Vale, the Reach, Dorne, the Iron Islands, the Westerlands, and the Stormlands. Not all would come in person, but representatives would arrive, bearing witness. The reason given was that there would be a royal announcement of great importance. As the day approached, the Red Keep brimmed with heraldry. Banners fluttered from the walls. The Wolf of Stark, the Sun Spear of Dorne, the Trout of Tully, the Moon and Falcon of Arryn, the Flower of Tyrell's bannermen, the Kraken of Greyjoy, the Flayed Man of Bolton's former lands replaced by the Direwolf, and more. The throng in the throne room was one of the largest gatherings since the days of King Robert's tournaments. Daenerys wore a regal gown of black and red, her hair adorned with delicate dragon motifs. Jon stood beside her, clad in a subdued gray cloak pinned with a direwolf brooch, his sword Longclaw belted at his side. When the assembled lords quieted, Daenerys stepped forward. Her voice was steady but resonant, echoing in the high vaulted space. She spoke first of unity, of the realm's healing since the war with the dead. She thanked the lords for their cooperation, praising the improvements in trade, reconstruction, and the better life that small folk were beginning to see. Then she said she had 2 announcements. "First, I wish to inform you of my intent to wed Jon Snow, the king in the north." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the hall. Daenerys continued calmly, "He has stood beside me as an ally, a friend, and I trust him with my life. We seek not to force union upon any who do not desire it, but to show our realm that the North and the Crown stand together as equals." She paused, letting that sink in. Many lords cheered, seeing a chance for stable leadership. Others looked uncertain, especially those who recalled the tensions between northern independence and southern rule. Still, the general mood was one of acceptance. Daenerys braced herself for the second, more seismic truth. "Second," she said, "I must share a revelation that may change how you see Jon Snow. He was believed to be the bastard son of Eddard Stark, but he is not. His true parents were Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, wed in secret, as proven by records uncovered by Archmaester Ambrose and verified by Brandon Stark's sworn testimony and Samwell Tarly's research." She gestured to Sam, who stood near the front in the plain robes of a scholar. He nodded solemnly. A hush fell so profound that the slightest breath seemed deafening. Daenerys continued, her voice calm but unyielding. "By blood, he is Aegon Targaryen, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne under traditional laws of male primogeniture." An eruption of voices. Some cried out in astonishment, others in confusion. Daenerys held up a hand, commanding silence. "He does not seek the throne. He stands with me, supporting my reign. If any question his loyalty, let them see us here, side by side. He has sworn to uphold my rule as queen, and in that we are united through marriage and mutual purpose." All eyes shifted to Jon. He stood tall, voice grave. "I bent the knee to Daenerys Targaryen once, not knowing my true blood. I bend it now, knowing full well who I am. The rightful queen is before you, chosen by the realm, not conquered by it. We stand together so Westeros may never again be torn apart by war or the living threatened by the dead." The hall seethed with excitement, worry, relief, all tangled together. Tyrion quietly gauged reactions. Many lords recognized that with Jon disclaiming the throne, Daenerys' claim was effectively unchallenged. Others noted that, in time, The realm might gain heirs who combine the lines of Targaryen and Stark, symbolizing a deeper unity. One lord from the Westerlands raised his voice. "What if the North chooses him over you, your grace? Will you hold them to their old vows?" Jon interjected, "The North follows me, yes. But we do not forget that Daenerys risked all to save us from the Night King. Our hearts are with her. I speak for my bannermen when I say we do not seek to supplant her. We only seek peace. If any of my bannermen object, they may do so openly, without fear." Silence. No one spoke. The memory of the Great War, the dragons, and the fact that Daenerys had not laid waste to the land weighed heavily. The North's delegates, those present, remained solemn but did not voice dissent. Slowly, applause began in pockets. From Dorne, from the Reach, from Tully bannermen, from Storm's End. Even some Westerlanders, seeing no immediate threat to their holdings, joined in. The chamber reverberated with a mixture of shock and acceptance. Daenerys felt a surge of relief so powerful she nearly sagged against Jon. Instead, she maintained her poise, offering a gracious smile that conveyed gratitude and resolve. The path forward was uncertain, but they had taken the greatest risk, revealing the truth and forging a union that might set aside the petty squabbles of centuries. She could see it in the eyes of many lords, that they recognized the significance of this moment. In the days that followed, King's Landing hummed with rumor and excitement. Some folks raged about the revelation. Pockets of Targaryen traditionalists who thought Jon should be king, or staunch northerners who resented a Targaryen heritage. But these voices were relatively few, drowned out by those who valued the stability that Daenerys and Jon offered together. Tyrion spent hours smoothing over ruffled feathers, while Varys whispered words in the right ears to quell nascent rebellions. Grey Worm and the Gold Cloaks kept the peace. The city had grown used to the idea that their queen sought no tyranny. This new dimension did not necessarily change that. Then came the wedding itself, held in the Great September that had been hastily rebuilt after the destruction by wildfire under Cersei's reign. It was no longer as grand as the original, but the newly appointed High Septon performed the ceremony with solemn dignity. Lords and ladies from every corner attended. Even Yara Greyjoy arrived, looking slightly uncomfortable on land, but she gave a hearty cheer when the union was pronounced. Gendry Baratheon stood near the front, representing the Stormlands. Sansa, having traveled south once again, stood with Arya, both wearing cautious smiles. The marriage was surprisingly simple for a royal event. Daenerys wore a gown of silver white, a subtle draconic motif embroidered along the hem. Jon wore a dark ensemble reminiscent of Stark attire, with a single red Targaryen emblem pinned over his heart. They exchanged vows that blended the old gods and the seven, symbolizing the union of North and South. In the hush that followed, they kissed, sealing a bond that might guide the realm toward a lasting peace. When they emerged onto the steps outside the Sept, a throng of small folk gathered, curious and hopeful. Drogon and Rhaegal roared overhead, a spectacle of living dragons that had once terrified the city. Now, as Daenerys and Jon raised their joined hands for all to see, the crowd broke into a cacophony of cheers. It wasn't purely unanimous joy. Fear still simmered in some hearts, cynicism in others. But the overall mood was optimism. If these two could stand together, maybe the old cycle of war could truly end. Tyrion, standing off to one side, wiped his brow in relief. He spotted Davos, who offered a nod of approval. Missandei, tears shining in her eyes, clasped Grey Worm's hand. Varys remained unreadable, though a small smile curved his lips. Later that evening, a feast filled the Red Keep's renovated ballroom. Tables overflowed with roast meats, fresh bread, pies stuffed with fruit from Dorne, and flagons of rich arbor wine. Musicians played reels and ballads. Dothraki mingled with Northmen, Dornish knights joked with Westerland's bannermen, and for the first time in years, King's Landing hosted a celebration that felt joyful rather than forced. Daenerys, newlywed, stood on a dais with Jon, accepting toasts and good wishes. At one point, she spotted Sansa approaching. The Lady of Winterfell seemed hesitant, but she curtsied gracefully. "My queen," Sansa said, her tone formal. Then she turned to Jon. "My king. Or perhaps it's something else now, Prince? You two have outdone yourselves in shaking up the realm's sense of tradition." Jon managed a faint, amused smirk. "We do what we must. Thank you for being here, Sansa." She nodded. "The North still needs you. But I can manage while you settle your new responsibilities here. Just don't forget about us." Daenerys cut in gently. We will not. We'll travel north soon and you'll always have a voice in our councils. She paused. I hope in time we can be, not just allies, but friends. Sansa weighed that, then offered a small, cautious smile. Perhaps. She gave a polite bow of her head and stepped away to mingle with other guests. Daenerys watched her go, feeling that small flicker of hope. The North might yet embrace her, albeit slowly. The hours stretched on. Guests danced, feasted, drank to excess. Jon danced stiffly with Daenerys, earning some teasing from those who remembered his reluctance at parties in Winterfell. But he moved with surprising grace when the music slowed. As the evening wore on, Daenerys allowed herself to truly exhale. For one night, at least, she could revel in the unity of the realm rather than fear its unraveling. When the feast ended, the newlyweds departed to their shared chambers amidst cheers and throne petals. In the privacy of candlelight, Daenerys let the weight of the day's decisions wash over her. Jon's touch was steady on her arm. They shared a moment of quiet, eyes meeting, reflecting on the enormity of what they had done. Their love had become a symbol for all of Westeros, for better or worse. In the weeks that followed, the realm did not suddenly become perfect. There were still tensions, old grudges, lords who muttered about the union of Targaryen and Stark. But no major rebellions arose, and the unstoppable wave of negativity that some had predicted never materialized. Instead, the small folk seemed more concerned with mundane improvements. Stable harvests, fair taxes, safer roads. Under Daenerys and Jon's joint leadership, she as queen, he as her consort and warden of the North, policies moved forward. They reformed laws to support orphans, to standardize weights and measures, to sponsor the building of new roads linking the major cities. In King's Landing, the finishing touches on the repaired sept were completed, city walls were reinforced, and improvements were made to the harbor's docks. Tyrion guided trade negotiations with bravos and pentos, ensuring no sly merchant tried to destabilize them again. Varys weeded out foreign plots, discreetly quashing any attempts to fund further banditry or anti-crown conspiracies. The Targaryen monarchy, once feared to be a phoenix of old madness, had instead become a unifying presence, equal parts Targaryen fire and northern resolve. Drogon and Rhaegal roamed the skies, occasionally flying north with their riders or hunting in the waters off Dragonstone. The realm grew used to the sight of dragons above farmland, and farmers were compensated for any lost livestock, further easing tensions. Over time, the dragons themselves became living symbols of the crown's power tempered by mercy. Stories spread of how no new city burned under their wings, how the queen heeded petitions and pleas instead of ignoring them. When winter's chill arrived anew, a gentler snowfall than the last came to King's Landing, dusting the city's rooftops white. Daenerys stood on a balcony in the Red Keep, cloaked in furs, watching the flakes settle. Jon stood beside her, arms crossed against the cold, though he seemed to find it mild compared to northern winters. The city below was quieter in the snowfall, lamplight flickering in windows like scattered stars. Daenerys slipped her hand into Jon's. We've come a long way from those first days at Dragonstone, haven't we? He squeezed her finch.